Tonight we drift backward along the dark ribbon of the Nile, long before the pyramids rise against the horizon, long before gold funerary masks and carved stone kings become symbols recognized across the world. The river moves quietly beside you now. Black water folds against reeds in slow rhythmic patterns, and somewhere farther down the bank, frogs pulse through the evening air like distant drums. You stand beside one of the first farming villages in ancient Egypt. The night smells of wet soil and river mud. Smoke from cooking fires hangs low beneath the stars. Dogs bark occasionally at shapes nobody fully sees. A child laughs once, then disappears into a cluster of mud brick homes where oil lamps glow softly through woven reed windows. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you settle in tonight, perhaps share your location, your local time, and the part of history that always pulls you back again. There is something strangely comforting about knowing where other listeners are resting while these old worlds return quietly to life. Now, dim the lights. The Nile keeps moving beside you. That matters more than anyone here fully understands. Each year, the river floods its banks and leaves behind thick black earth that clings to your feet when you walk too close to the waterline. The mud smells rich and alive. Farmers crouch low beneath the morning sun, pressing seeds carefully into the softened ground. They do not think of themselves as participants in history. They think about grain storage, fishing nets, sore backs, and whether the river will rise properly next season. History usually begins that way, not with crowns or monuments, with tired people hoping the water returns. You move through the village slowly while dawn begins to thin the darkness. Women grind grain against stone slabs. The steady scraping sound blends with bird calls overhead. Men repair baskets using strips of reed pulled from the marshes nearby. Children chase each other barefoot through dust that still holds traces of yesterday's heat. Everything feels temporary. The homes are small. Roofs sag slightly beneath bundled reeds. Storage jars crack easily in the dry air. Sand drifts against walls during strong winds. Yet people remain here because the river rewards patience. Beyond the village, the desert waits in complete silence. That contrast shapes Egypt before Egypt exists. On one side, fertile life stretches along the Nile in a narrow green corridor. On the other side, endless rock and burning emptiness press inward like an enormous sleeping animal. Survival depends on staying close to the water. Communities gather tightly along its edges, linked by boats, seasonal travel, and shared dependence on the flood. You begin noticing how the river quietly organizes everything. Paths follow its curves, trade follows its current, stories travel upon it. Even beliefs begin forming around its dependable rhythms. When the flood arrives, life returns. When the flood fails, fear spreads quickly through every household. Some historians believe these early communities already sense something sacred inside that cycle. It is difficult not to. The Nile appears almost miraculous against the surrounding desert. You can stand on dry stone beneath brutal sunlight, then walk a short distance and find fish glimmering beneath cool reeds. The contrast feels divine. At night, elders sit beside small fires and speak softly about spirits hidden inside animals, storms and water. Their world feels crowded with invisible forces. They carry amulets carved from bone or stone. They bury loved ones carefully in shallow graves near the desert edge, placing pottery or tools nearby as though some part of the journey continues after death. Even now, long before pharaohs dominate temple walls, Egypt is already developing its deep relationship with eternity. That idea arrives early here. The dead remain close. You walk farther north along the riverbank where another settlement gathers around fishing docks made from rough wooden poles. Men pull nets from the water with practiced movements. Fish scales catch sunlight briefly before disappearing into woven baskets. One fisherman curses softly after slicing his palm on a fin. Another laughs at him without sympathy. Small moments survive longer than kingdoms sometimes. The air grows hotter by midday. Flies gather near drying fish. Sweat darkens linen clothing. Somebody nearby crushes herbs beneath a stone pestle, releasing sharp, bitter scents into the heat. Life here is physical in ways modern people often forget. Everything touches the body directly. Mud between toes, smoke in lungs, sun against neck, hunger tightening the stomach during poor seasons. And yet there is beauty. Not grand beauty yet. Human beauty. A mother humming quietly while braiding her daughter's hair. A boat gliding through orange evening light. Bread warming beside an open clay oven while exhausted workers finally sit together in silence after sunset. You begin understanding how civilization grows from repetition. Not glorious repetition. Ordinary repetition. Planting, harvesting, repairing, waiting. The Nile teaches patience because it moves according to its own rhythms, not human desire. That lesson settles deeply into Egyptian culture. Stability becomes sacred here. Predictability becomes comforting. Chaos feels terrifying because people know how fragile order really is beside the desert. Over generations, villages expand. Trade routes slowly widen between communities along Upper and Lower Egypt. Pottery styles spread. Religious symbols become shared across wider distances. Leaders emerge naturally during disputes or difficult floods. Some villages grow wealthier than others through better farmland or stronger trade connections. Power begins gathering quietly, not all at once. That is rarely how human history works. You meet a local chieftain standing beneath a simple shelter near the river. He wears jewellery made from shells and polished stone. Guards remain close beside him, carrying wooden clubs. Villagers lower their eyes slightly when speaking to him. Respect and fear already travel together. He settles arguments over irrigation channels. He organises grain storage. He negotiates trade. He also enjoys being obeyed. That part never changes much across history. As generations pass, rival communities compete for territory and resources. Small conflicts erupt along the Nile. Boats carrying goods occasionally disappear. Villages form alliances for protection. Symbols of leadership become increasingly elaborate. Ceremonial objects appear during religious gatherings. Slowly, almost invisibly, the foundations of kingship begin taking shape. Nobody standing beside these early fires fully imagines what will come. Not the pyramids, not the colossal statues, not the golden tombs hidden beneath desert cliffs. For now, Egypt remains scattered along the river like fragile lanterns glowing against immense darkness. But something powerful is forming inside this narrow green corridor between desert and water, a shared identity, a growing belief that order itself can be protected, expanded, and perhaps even eternal. Night settles again over the Nile. The water reflects trembling stars. Insects hum softly through the reeds. Somewhere nearby, someone mourns quietly beside a fresh grave while another family celebrates a birth only a few houses away. Life and death already move together here. They always will, and far beyond the sleeping villages. Beyond the black river banks and drifting smoke, the future waits patiently beneath untouched desert stone. Morning arrives beneath a pale veil of river mist. You wake to the sound of wooden oars dipping steadily through water, while birds wheel overhead in restless circles. The Nile glows silver beneath the early light. Along the shoreline, fishermen already work in silence, their narrow boats cutting long ripples through floating reeds. Something feels different now. The villages no longer exist as isolated pockets beside the river. Generations have passed since those first farming settlements pressed themselves cautiously against the floodplain. Traders expanded. Rival leaders have risen and disappeared. Graves have grown larger. Ceremonies have become more elaborate. Symbols once belonging to single communities now appear across vast stretches of the Nile. Egypt is beginning to imagine itself as one land. That transformation does not happen peacefully. You travel south into Upper Egypt, where dry cliffs rise sharply above the riverbanks and settlements cling tightly to the fertile edge of the floodplain. The air smells of dust, wet clay, and smoke drifting from kiln fires. Potters shape jars beside open workshops, while labourers carry baskets of grain beneath the hard morning sun. People speak carefully here when discussing power. A ruler named Narmer has emerged from the south. Some call him a conqueror. Others call him a unifier. In later centuries, his image will survive, carved into ceremonial stone. Wearing the white crown of Upper Egypt in one scene and the red crown of Lower Egypt in another. 2 lands, 1 king, but here, in the uncertain present, nobody knows how permanent this new order will become. You stand among villagers gathered beside a marketplace as travellers arrive carrying rumours from the north. There are stories of battles along the delta marshes, fortified towns surrendering after brief resistance, river patrols enforcing new authority, tax collectors appearing in settlements that once answered only to local chiefs. Ordinary people respond the way ordinary people usually do when kingdoms change hands, with caution. A baker shaping flat rounds of bread beside a clay oven barely looks up while discussing Narmer's victories. She cares more about grain prices than royal symbolism. Nearby, an old fisherman spits into the dust and mutters that rulers always promise stability before demanding more labour. A younger man disagrees. He says unity could protect trade routes and prevent constant regional conflict. He says the Nile should belong to one ruler because the river itself flows as one body. Neither man fully trusts the future. That feels honest. The wind shifts through hanging reed mats, carrying the smell of river water mixed with animal dung drying beneath the heat. Goats wander between homes. Children chase each other through narrow pathways lined with storage jars. Daily life continues even while political transformation unfolds around it. History often sounds louder in hindsight than it feels in the moment. Narmer's authority spreads gradually through force, ceremony, and careful symbolism. Royal standards appear along the riverbanks. Officials begin organising taxation and labour more systematically. Religious traditions from different regions blend together beneath centralised rule. The idea of the pharaoh starts forming here, not merely a king, something larger, a figure standing between humanity and divine order. You travel north toward the Nile Delta, where the river branches into countless waterways beneath broad skies crowded with migrating birds. Papyrus reeds sway gently in the marshes. Insects rise thick above stagnant pools. Boats glide through narrow channels carrying grain, fish, pottery, and officials representing the growing state. The delta feels softer than the south. Greener, more difficult to control. Perhaps that is partly why unification matters so deeply to Narmer. A divided Nile invites instability. A unified Nile promises wealth beyond anything earlier rulers could command. Grain production increases. Trade expands farther into neighbouring lands. Precious materials begin arriving from deserts and distant territories. Power gathers at the centre like floodwater behind a dam. You enter an administrative settlement where scribes sit cross-legged beneath shaded courtyards, recording inventories onto clay and early writing surfaces. Their hands move quickly with practiced concentration. Baskets of grain are counted, livestock tallied, labour obligations documented carefully. Writing itself is evolving alongside the kingdom. That matters enormously, though nobody fully realises it yet. The ability to record taxes, territory, rituals, and royal authority allows Egypt to extend power across distances impossible for earlier village leaders. Memory no longer depends entirely upon spoken tradition. Symbols preserve commands beyond the moment of speech. One exhausted scribe rubs his aching wrist and jokes quietly that future generations will never appreciate how much paperwork holds civilization together. You suspect he is correct. Outside, the afternoon heat settles heavily across the settlement. Linen sticks against damp skin. Flies cluster around baskets of fish left too long beneath the sun. A government official arrives by boat surrounded by guards carrying polished stone maces. Villagers bow as he passes. Not deeply, but enough. Authority still feels relatively new. At sunset, ceremonies begin beside a temple structure decorated with painted symbols of falcons, reeds, and divine kingship. Priests burn incense that curls upward through darkening air. Drums pulse softly. Oil lamps flicker against whitewashed walls while offerings of bread, beer, and flowers are arranged carefully before sacred images. You notice how politics and religion now move together almost seamlessly. The pharaoh does not simply rule Egypt. He protects cosmic balance itself. At least that is what people are increasingly encouraged to believe. And perhaps many truly do believe it. Stability along the Nile feels miraculous enough already. A powerful king who guarantees order against famine, invasion, and chaos becomes emotionally persuasive in a dangerous world. Still, beneath the ceremonies, human realities remain stubbornly ordinary. A labourer complains about sore shoulders after hauling stone all day. A mother worries because her son has fever. A guard secretly fears battle despite pretending otherwise before his companions. Kingship grows larger while individual lives remain fragile. Night settles slowly across the river. Torches reflect in dark water. Crocodiles drift silently near muddy banks, somewhere in the distance. Musicians play reed flutes during celebration, honouring Nama's victories. The music sounds strangely lonely travelling through open darkness. You begin sensing both the strength and vulnerability inside this new kingdom. Egypt is becoming unified, but unity requires constant maintenance. Officials must travel. Crops must remain abundant. Rivals must stay subdued. Priests must reinforce sacred legitimacy. The illusion of eternal order demands endless human effort behind the scenes. That pattern will repeat across every dynasty still waiting ahead. For now, though, optimism rises with the floodwaters. The two lands stand together beneath one ruler, and along the Nile, beneath endless stars and drifting smoke, people begin imagining that this kingdom may last forever. The desert dawn arrives cold before the heat remembers itself. You walk west of the Nile where the fertile earth ends abruptly against open sand and pale limestone ridges. Behind you, the river valley glows green beneath morning mist. Ahead, the desert stretches silent and empty, broken only by work camps, stone quarries, and lines of labourers already moving beneath the early sun. Something extraordinary is beginning here. Not yet the great pyramids people will someday picture immediately when Egypt is mentioned. Those still wait beyond the horizon of time. For now, Egypt experiments with stone itself, testing whether human ambition can outlive flesh. You smell dust before anything else. Fine white dust coats, sandals, skin, tools, even bread carried by workers eating hurried breakfast before the day grows unbearable. Men cough into linen cloths. Stone hammers strike limestone in sharp repeating rhythms that echo across the plateau like distant knocking. The sound never fully stops. A pharaoh named Djoser rules Egypt now. His court gathers at Memphis near the Nile, where royal authority has grown far stronger since Nama first united the kingdom generations earlier. Administrators manage taxes across wide territories. Priests oversee increasingly complex religious rituals. Skilled craftsmen serve the crown full-time rather than seasonally. Egypt feels stable, prosperous, confident enough to attempt impossible things. At the centre of this transformation stands a man named Imhotep, architect, advisor, priest, scholar. One of those rare historical figures who seems almost too capable to belong entirely to ordinary life. Later generations will remember him with near mythical admiration. But here, walking among unfinished stone blocks and sweating labour crews, he remains very human. Tired eyes, careful voice, constant pressure. You glimpse him briefly near a set of construction plans spread across a wooden table weighted with stones against the wind. He studies measurements while officials speak anxiously around him. The project has changed repeatedly. What began as a traditional flat mastaba tomb has evolved upward into stacked layers rising toward the sky. The step pyramid, a shape Egypt has never seen before. Nearby workers argue while dragging sledges loaded with limestone blocks across dampened sand. Water boys move alongside them, pouring carefully measured amounts ahead of the runners to reduce friction. Muscles strain beneath the weight. Foremen shout instructions over scraping wood and grinding stone. Nobody here thinks they are building a tourist destination. They are building eternity. That belief changes everything. The Egyptians increasingly view the pharaoh not simply as ruler but as a divine figure whose safe passage into the afterlife protects the entire kingdom's cosmic stability. Tombs grow larger because death itself carries enormous political and spiritual importance. If the king lives eternally among the gods, Egypt remains secure beneath divine favour. At least that is the hope. You move through the worker settlement beside the construction site. The atmosphere surprises you. It is not purely misery. Though exhaustion hangs everywhere, bakers prepare huge quantities of bread inside smoking ovens, clay jars filled with beer-lined storage areas. Physicians treat injuries using honey, bandages, and herbal mixtures. Workers laugh sometimes. That matters. One young labourer jokes that future kings will surely demand even larger monuments, because rulers never know when to stop competing with dead predecessors. His friend laughs so hard he nearly spills his beer ration. Dry humour survives every civilization. The heat intensifies by midday. Stone surfaces burn beneath your hands. Sweat runs down backs already whitened by quarry dust. Teams of men haul blocks upward along ramps while overseers track progress carefully. Accidents happen. A crushed foot, a slip rope, somebody collapsing from heat exhaustion beneath open sunlight. Yet the work continues steadily because Egypt now possesses something rare in the ancient world: organisation. The Nile's reliable flood cycles create agricultural surplus. That surplus supports specialised labour. Specialised labour allows monumental construction. Monumental construction reinforces royal power and religious identity, which further stabilises the kingdom. Everything connects. Even suffering becomes administrative. Inside shaded workshops, artisans carve reliefs showing Djoser performing sacred rituals beside gods with animal heads and calm immortal faces. Their hands move delicately through limestone dust while outside, heavy labour grinds onward beneath brutal sunlight. Two forms of work supporting the same dream. You pause near a group of women preparing food for labour crews. One complains quietly about aching knees while shaping dough beside a low table. Another worries because her husband works near the upper levels of the pyramid where accidents happen more frequently. They speak about royal divinity respectfully, though not reverently. People are practical when discussing loved ones. The smell of onions, baking bread, and smoke drifts heavily through the camp. Children carry water jars between tents. Donkeys bray impatiently beside supply wagons arriving from the river. Scribes document grain distribution with obsessive precision because feeding thousands of workers requires constant coordination. Civilization often looks less glamorous up close. More paperwork, more sweating bodies, more waiting in lines for food. Still, something emotionally powerful exists here. At sunset, workers gather along the plateau edge overlooking the Nile Valley far below. The river catches red light beneath enormous skies streaked with gold and violet. Even exhausted labourers fall briefly silent before the view, and there it stands. The step pyramid rising above the desert, layer upon layer climbing upward unlike anything built before in human history. Not smooth yet, not perfect, but unmistakably reaching toward permanence. You sense how shocking this structure must feel to people seeing it for the first time. Earlier tombs belong to earth. This one ascends visibly into the heavens themselves. Stone replaces fragile mud brick. Geometry imposes order against chaotic desert emptiness. It feels eternal even while unfinished. Night arrives slowly across Saqqara. Cool air finally moves through the camp, carrying relief from the day's suffocating heat. Workers massage sore shoulders beside small fires. Priests chant evening prayers within temple courtyards scented by incense and oil smoke. Somewhere in the darkness, jackals cry across the desert. The sound unsettles you slightly. Egyptians associate jackals with Anubis, guardian of the dead, an appropriate companion for this place. You realize the pyramid is not merely architecture, it is a declaration. Egypt now possesses enough confidence, wealth, organization, and spiritual ambition to reshape landscapes for the sake of memory. Future pharaohs are watching carefully, and somewhere beneath the quiet stars inside royal courts lit by flickering lamps and guarded corridors, larger dreams are already beginning to form. Dreams made not of steps, but mountains. The pyramid rises before sunrise like a dark horizon against the fading stars. You stand on the Giza plateau while cold wind moves across the limestone ridge, carrying sand softly against your sandals. Below, the Nile Valley still sleeps beneath blue morning haze. Palm trees drift in and out of shadow. Farther east, tiny cooking fires begin appearing one by one beside crowded worker settlements. And above everything else stands the unfinished monument of King Khufu. Even half completed, it feels impossible. The scale unsettles your sense of proportion. Stone blocks sit stacked in endless geometric layers climbing steadily toward the pale sky. Ramps snake around the structure crowded with labour gangs hauling limestone upward, using ropes darkened by sweat and dust. The Great Pyramid is less a building than a landscape transformed by human will. You hear it before fully understanding it. Hammering! Scraping sledges, foremen shouting, oxen straining, thousands of individual sounds blending into one enormous living machine. Egypt has entered the height of the Old Kingdom now. Royal authority stretches confidently along the Nile. Agricultural systems operate with astonishing reliability. Trade networks bring cedar wood from Lebanon, copper from Sinai, gold from Nubia, and exotic goods from lands many workers will never see themselves. All of it flows toward projects like this, toward permanence. You walk through the workers' village where narrow streets already fill with movement despite the early hour. Bakers remove steaming loaves from clay ovens. The smell of fresh bread mixes with sweat, smoke, damp straw, and livestock. Men sit briefly outside sleeping quarters, wrapping strips of linen around blistered hands before another day begins. These workers are not slaves in the way later legends often imagine. Many are seasonal labourers supporting the king during Nile flood months when farmland rests underwater. Others are permanent skilled craftsmen, engineers, surveyors, or stone specialists. They receive food, shelter, beer, and medical treatment from the state. Still, none of this feels easy. A young labourer coughs heavily beside a water station, limestone dust coating his face like pale ash. Nearby, an older worker massages swollen knees while quietly admitting he sometimes dreams about stone collapsing endlessly toward him. The pyramid lives inside people's bodies before it lives in history. You move closer to the construction ramps. The heat intensifies quickly once sunlight reaches the plateau. Stone reflects brightness upward so fiercely you narrow your eyes instinctively. Teams of men lean into hauling ropes with synchronized effort, while overseers clap rhythms to coordinate movement. Heave, pause, heave again. One slip can kill someone. You watch a sled carrying limestone blocks inch upward along wet sand carefully prepared to reduce friction. Water carriers move constantly beside the ramps. Engineers inspect angles using cords and measuring rods with obsessive precision. Scribes document labour quotas beneath shaded stations where ink dries almost instantly in the heat. Order governs everything here. That may be the real achievement of the pyramids. Not merely engineering. Coordination, feeding workers, transporting stone, Maintaining authority over thousands of lives for decades, the monument becomes proof that Egypt itself functions. Yet beneath the machinery of state power, ordinary emotions continue quietly unfolding. A worker shares dried fish with his younger brother during a short break. Two women argue beside storage jars over missing grain rations. A physician cleans a deep rope burn using honey while the injured man winces but refuses to cry out. Nobody wants to appear weak near the hauling crews. You notice humour surviving everywhere despite exhaustion. One labour gang has painted a joking nickname across their work shelter, comparing themselves to royal cattle dragging the sun itself across the sky. Another group mocks a particularly arrogant overseer behind his back whenever he passes. Human beings remain recognisable across thousands of years, even here. Especially here! At midday, the plateau becomes almost unbearable. Heat shimmers above the stone surface. Sand stings exposed skin during sudden gusts of wind. Sweat evaporates so quickly it leaves workers coated in white mineral residue. Some men wrap damp cloth around their necks for relief. Others simply endure silently. Then you see Khufu himself, only briefly. A royal procession approaches from the direction of the river causeway lined with guards. Priests and attendants shielding themselves beneath elaborate fans. The pharaoh rides upright beneath polished ceremonial standards glinting in sunlight. People bow immediately. Conversations stop. Even exhausted workers straighten despite aching backs and trembling arms. Khufu's face remains difficult to read from a distance. Calm, perhaps. Controlled, certainly. History will remember him strangely, sometimes portraying him as harsh and distant, though accounts written centuries later often blur truth with resentment or myth. You wonder what he sees when looking at the pyramid. Immortality, security, fear. Perhaps all rulers who commission monumental work secretly hope stone can silence death. If so, it never fully works. Inside the royal planning chambers near the construction site, architects discuss alignment with astonishing seriousness. The pyramid must reflect cosmic order itself. Corners align closely with cardinal directions. Internal chambers follow sacred symbolic logic tied to resurrection and celestial movement. Nothing here is accidental. Egyptian civilization increasingly revolves around maintaining ma'at, the principle of harmony, balance, and divine order. The pyramid embodies that belief physically. Perfect geometry imposed against chaotic desert wilderness. But maintaining order requires immense labour from living bodies. That tension lingers everywhere around Giza. At sunset, the atmosphere softens. Workers descend the ramps slowly beneath skies turning copper and deep violet. Fires begin appearing throughout the camps. The smell of lentil stew drifts through cooling air. Someone nearby plays a reed flute softly, while others sit massaging cramped hands in exhausted silence. Then the wind changes. For a moment, all you hear is breathing. Thousands of people resting beside the largest structure humanity has yet attempted. And suddenly the pyramid no longer feels purely triumphant. It feels lonely too. A mountain built because one man must die. That realization settles quietly over the plateau while darkness spreads across the Nile Valley below. Oil lamps flicker beside unfinished stone corridors leading deep into the monument's hidden chambers. Priests whisper evening prayers for the king's eternal soul. Beyond them, workers sleep heavily beneath simple blankets, already dreading tomorrow's heat. The Great Pyramid continues rising into the night, and Egypt, standing at the height of its confidence, cannot yet imagine how fragile even the strongest kingdoms eventually become. The silence arrives slowly at first. Not sudden claps, not dramatic fire, not armies crashing through palace gates beneath storm-dark skies. History rarely grants such theatrical endings. Instead, Egypt begins to thin at the edges like old linen worn by too many hands. You feel it first in the fields. The Nile flood comes weekly one season. Farmers wait anxiously beside cracked riverbanks where water should stand higher against the reeds. Men kneel in damp soil, rubbing mud between their fingers as though touch alone might reveal whether enough grain can survive. The smell of the earth has changed. Drier now. Dust lingers longer in the air. Children carry smaller baskets during harvest because there is simply less to gather. Granaries that once overflowed beneath the confident rule of pyramid kings begin echoing slightly when workers step inside. At first, officials insist everything remains under control. They always do. The old kingdom still stands outwardly magnificent. The pyramids remain fixed against the horizon, enormous and indifferent beneath the sun. Priests continue ceremonies inside polished temples. Scribes record taxes in neat black ink. Royal authority still travels up and down the Nile aboard decorated barges. But beneath the surface, strain spreads quietly through the kingdom. You travel north toward Memphis, where administrative centres once buzzed with endless confidence during Khufu's reign. Now conversations feel sharper. Grain shipments arrive late. Local officials argue over distribution quotas. Tax collectors face growing resentment in villages already struggling to feed themselves. The heat feels heavier too, perhaps because hungry people notice weather more closely. A farmer sits beside an irrigation canal that barely trickles through the mud. His face is lined deeply from years beneath the sun. He tells you his father remembered stronger floods during the Great Pyramid generations. Back then, the river felt dependable, sacred almost. Now people watch the Nile with suspicion. That emotional change matters. Egyptian kingship depends upon the belief that the pharaoh maintains cosmic balance between humanity, nature, and the gods. Weak floods challenge that confidence directly. If divine order truly governs the kingdom, why do the waters fail? Priests offer explanations. Officials issue reassurances. Still, anxiety spreads faster than certainty. You continue south through villages where old stability feels increasingly fragile. Storage jars stand emptier. Livestock appear thinner. Some families quietly abandon settlements searching for better farmland closer to stronger irrigation channels. Others stay and endure. Most people throughout history do exactly that. Endure. The pyramids themselves begin changing meaning during these years. Once symbols of overwhelming royal authority, they now loom above struggling communities like reminders of resources already spent. Massive stone monuments cannot feed hungry children. Dead kings resting in elaborate tombs become harder to admire during failing harvests. Nobody says this openly near officials, but you feel it lingering beneath conversations. At a riverside marketplace, merchants argue over grain prices while flies swarm around baskets of onions and drying fish. Tempers rise quickly. One elderly woman accuses traders of hoarding supplies. A guard intervenes before the shouting becomes violence. Nearby, a scribe quietly adjusts tax records while pretending not to notice the growing anger surrounding him. Even he looks exhausted. The political structure weakens gradually as regional governors gain more independence from the central monarchy. These officials, called nomarchs, control local resources and labour within their territories. During prosperous years, strong pharaohs kept them loyal through wealth and authority. Now loyalty becomes negotiable. Some nomarchs begin acting almost like independent rulers. They commission local tombs larger than older generations would have dared. Their names appear more prominently in inscriptions. Power drifts outward from the royal centre along the Nile. The kingdom does not shatter all at once. It loosens, like rope fibres slowly separating. You enter a provincial court where a local governor hosts a modest banquet beneath painted walls showing scenes of hunting and abundance. Musicians play softly while servants pour beer into clay cups. Yet the atmosphere feels uneasy despite the performance of comfort. Everyone senses instability. The governor speaks respectfully about the pharaoh, but not warmly. He praises local irrigation projects more enthusiastically than royal decrees. His guards remain close beside him during conversations. Outside the compound walls, farmers wait anxiously to petition for reduced grain obligations. Inside, roasted duck fills the air with rich, oily scent. Outside, people worry about bread. Civilizations often reveal themselves most clearly through such contrasts. As years pass, royal construction projects slow dramatically. Fewer monumental tombs rise from the desert. Skilled labour disperses towards regional centres. Some royal burial complexes remain unfinished, abandoned beneath drifting sand and unfinished scaffolding. Imagine the emotional effect of that. For generations, Egyptians watched kings reshape landscapes with apparent limitless authority. Now construction stops, stone sits untouched. Workers leave camps that once thundered with activity. Silence gathers around unfinished monuments, and silence can feel frightening. You spend one evening beside the edge of the Nile during low flood season. The river moves sluggishly beneath dim moonlight. Reeds whisper softly in the night wind, somewhere distant. Jackals cry beyond abandoned work sites where temporary labour camps once stood, crowded with thousands of voices. A boatman sitting nearby repairs torn netting by lamplight. Without looking up, he says something simple. The river remembers when we grow proud. Then he returns quietly to his work. Perhaps he means the gods punish arrogance. Perhaps he only means nature ignores human ambition. In Egypt, those ideas often blur together. Historians still debate exactly how severe these drought years became. Climate shifts likely played a major role. Political fragmentation deepened existing problems. Economic strain weakened centralized authority already burdened by enormous royal obligations. But standing here beside the Dark Nile, statistics feel less important than atmosphere. People are frightened, not constantly, not dramatically, just enough to change how they look at tomorrow. Night settles fully across the valley. Temple lamps flicker beside aging monuments built for kings already fading into distant memory. Wind moves sand slowly against stone entrances sealed generations earlier. The pyramids remain standing, but the confidence that created them has begun slipping away, and somewhere in the darkness between scattered villages and uneasy provincial courts, Egypt drifts quietly toward its first great collapse. The river still flows. That is the strange part. Even as Egypt fractures into competing regions and uncertain loyalties, the Nile continues its patient movement beneath the sun exactly as before. Boats drift along familiar currents. Fishermen cast nets into silver morning water. Children still laugh beside muddy banks while mothers wash linen in the shallows. History collapses around ordinary life more quietly than people imagine. You travel through Middle Egypt now, where authority feels local rather than national. The old certainty surrounding divine kingship has faded into something cautious and fragmented. No single ruler fully controls the two lands anymore. Different dynasties claim legitimacy from separate cities. Regional governors strengthen private armies. Rival courts send messengers carrying promises, threats, and carefully rehearsed insults along the river. And everyone watches everyone else. The air feels tense even during peaceful moments. At a crowded riverside dock, merchants unload baskets of dates and jars of beer while armed guards stand nearby, pretending not to monitor one another. Traders speak in lowered voices about alliances shifting farther north. A ferryman swears one ruler has already declared himself rightful king, though another boat captain insists the claim collapsed weeks ago. Accounts differ constantly now. Truth travels poorly during divided times. You continue south toward the city of Heracleopolis, one of several centres competing for authority during this long period historians later call the First Intermediate Period. The city smells of river mud, cooking oil, livestock, and crowded humanity pressed tightly within defensive walls. Nothing here resembles the confident monument building of the Pyramid Age. Resources feel thinner, more guarded. Workshops produce practical goods instead of grand ceremonial projects. Grain stores remain heavily protected. Scribes record distributions carefully because shortages can quickly become unrest. You pass a line of labourers waiting for bread rations beneath the hard afternoon sun. Nobody speaks much. Dust clings to sweating faces. One exhausted man shifts his sleeping child from one shoulder to the other, while staring blankly toward the distribution tables. Hunger changes the emotional atmosphere of entire societies. Not always starvation, sometimes merely uncertainty, the fear that food may not last. Inside the local governor's residence, officials discuss border disputes with neighbouring territories. Maps painted onto papyrus lie spread across a low wooden table weighted by bronze knives. Irrigation canals matter almost as much as military strength now. Whoever controls water controls survival. Outside, donkeys bray in narrow alleyways while potters shape clay beside open workshops. The smell of wet earth mixes with smoke drifting from cooking fires. Daily routines continue stubbornly beneath political instability because people must still eat, trade, marry, bury their dead, and wake again tomorrow. That persistence feels deeply human. You meet a young scribe named Panesi working beneath a shaded courtyard near the marketplace. His fingers are stained black with ink. Reed pens rest behind his ear. He complains jokingly that rival rulers produce endless paperwork because every faction insists upon documenting its own version of legitimacy. "Too many kings," he mutters softly while drying fresh ink. Then, after a pause, he adds something quieter. "Not enough grain." The comment lingers. Egypt's fragmentation affects emotional life as much as politics. People no longer trust permanence the way earlier generations once did. Grand claims about eternal order sound thinner after witnessing royal authority weaken so visibly. Local identity grows stronger while national unity feels increasingly abstract. Yet culture itself does not disappear. Far from it. Art continues evolving. Literature becomes more personal and reflective during these uncertain centuries. Some surviving texts speak openly about social disorder, grief, and moral confusion in ways earlier royal inscriptions rarely allowed. Instability sometimes makes people more honest. One evening, you sit beside a modest household near the edge of a farming village while rain threatens faintly in the distance. The family shares lentil stew and coarse bread around a low-oil lamp. Smoke curls upward into the dark rafters while insects hum outside beyond the reed door. The father fought recently in a regional conflict farther north. Not a glorious campaign, mostly guarding irrigation channels and escorting grain shipments through contested territory. He describes long days beneath brutal heat, sleeping beside muddy embankments with wet leather armor sticking against his skin. What frightened him most, he admits quietly, was not battle. It was uncertainty, not knowing which ruler would claim the land next year. His wife listened silently while mending torn linen by lamplight. Their oldest daughter has never seen the kingdom, united beneath one pharaoh. To her, divided Egypt simply feels normal. That realization lands heavily. Civilizations change generation by generation until memory itself shifts. Still, mid the fragmentation, another force slowly gathers in the south. The city of Thebes rises gradually beside the Nile, far from the old northern centers of power. Its rulers present themselves not merely as ambitious warlords, but as restorers of order. They speak carefully about reunification, stability, and divine balance returning to Egypt. People want to believe them. That desire matters politically. You travel toward Thebes through landscapes growing narrower and more dramatic. Cliffs rise sharply above the river. Tombs cut into rocky hillsides overlook fertile strips of farmland, glowing green against surrounding desert stone. The region feels both isolated and resilient. At temple sites, priests continue rituals honoring ancient gods despite political division elsewhere. Incense drifts through cool stone halls while chants echo softly against carved walls. Faith remains one of the few continuous threads binding Egypt together. Even fractured kingdoms need meaning. One night during a festival honoring local deities, musicians gather beside torchlit courtyards while dancers move through drifting incense smoke. Children run laughing between adults carrying beer jars and woven baskets of figs. For several hours, People seem almost free from anxiety. Then the music fades. Guards return to the gates, and the divided world waits outside again. You realize Egypt is surviving not because its rulers remain strong, but because ordinary people continue rebuilding daily life beneath instability. Farmers still plant beside uncertain floods, scribes still record accounts, mothers still comfort frightened children during distant political conflicts they cannot control. Empires often depend more upon such quiet endurance than royal ambition. Late at night you stand alone beside the Nile while cold wind moves along the water. Somewhere across the dark river, temple bells sound faintly through the silence. The stars reflect against slow-moving currents exactly as they did centuries earlier during Egypt's first villages. The kingdom feels wounded now, but not dead, and in the southern darkness beyond the river bends, Thebes prepares patiently for its moment to rise. Morning sunlight pours across the cliffs of Thebes in long bands of gold. You stand beside the Nile watching thin layers of mist lift slowly from the water, while temple bells echo faintly between the rocky hills. Palm leaves rustle in the cool air. Nearby, fishermen pull silver-scaled catches from woven nets, their quiet voices drifting softly through the dawn. The world feels steadier here, not safe exactly, but steadier, after generations of division competing rulers and uncertain harvests. Egypt begins reaching once more toward unity. The city of Thebes rises at the center of that effort, carried forward by rulers who understand something important about exhausted people. Most humans eventually crave order more than glory. A Theban ruler named Mentuhotep now presses northward along the Nile, gradually defeating rival kingdoms and restoring centralized authority. Soldiers march beneath banners painted with sacred symbols. Messengers travel constantly between fortified towns. Local governors swear loyalty carefully, sometimes sincerely, sometimes simply because resistance no longer seems practical. And slowly, almost cautiously, Egypt begins stitching itself back together. You enter Thebes through crowded riverside districts where boats unload grain, timber, pottery, and livestock beneath the growing heat of morning. The smell of fish, wet rope, mud brick, and animal dung hangs thick in the air. Traders call out prices from shaded stalls while donkeys shove impatiently through narrow streets. The city feels alive in a way fragmented Egypt often did not. Not rich beyond imagination, not overflowing with triumph. Alive. That difference matters. Workers repair temple walls damaged during earlier conflicts. Scribes organize inventories within reopened administrative buildings. Artisans carve fresh inscriptions celebrating reunification and divine favor returning to the land. Every society emerging from collapse tries to tell itself a hopeful story. Sometimes the story helps make recovery possible. You walk through a government courtyard where officials debate irrigation repairs beside maps painted onto stretched linen. Water management becomes a national obsession again. Canals neglected during divided decades require rebuilding. Flood patterns must be monitored carefully. Grain storage systems need restoration. Civilization is often less about conquest than maintenance. One administrator rubs tired eyes while reviewing harvest estimates from northern provinces. He jokes quietly that reunifying Egypt mostly means inheriting everyone else's broken problems. No one laughs very hard. Still, optimism exists here beneath the exhaustion. Mentuhotep presents himself not only as conqueror, but healer of the kingdom. Temple inscriptions describe restored harmony between the gods and the two lands. Ceremonies grow increasingly elaborate. Religious processions move through Thebes carrying sacred statues draped in linen and flowers while crowds gather respectfully along the streets. The emotional power of reunification runs deep. Older Egyptians remember the fear and instability of the fractured years. Younger generations inherited uncertainty as normal life. Now, the return of centralized authority feels almost miraculous to some people. Even if taxes remain heavy and political tensions linger beneath the surface, You notice relief more than celebration. A farmer repairing irrigation channels along the riverbank tells you he does not care which dynasty rules, as long as the canals function properly and soldiers stop raiding grain shipments. His hands are cracked from labour. Mud dries thick against his calves beneath the afternoon sun. Practical hopes. Those sustain kingdoms more reliably than patriotic speeches. At sunset, you travel west across the Nile toward Mentuhotep's mortuary complex built against the dramatic cliffs near Deir el-Bahari. The structure rises in terraces and colonnades, unlike the old pyramid complexes farther north. Torches flicker along stone pathways while priests move quietly between shadow chambers carrying incense burners. The air smells of myrrh and cool stone. Something emotional has shifted in Egyptian architecture. The old pyramid age projected overwhelming certainty and divine permanence. These newer monuments feel more intimate somehow, shaped by memory of collapse. Beauty remains important, but so does restoration. Egypt no longer assumes stability as automatic. It has learned fragility. Inside temple halls, painted scenes show offerings, processions, fertile fields, and victorious kings restoring cosmic order after chaos. The imagery feels deliberate, reassuring, almost therapeutic for a wounded civilization. You pause beside a wall relief showing ordinary labourers carrying grain beneath watchful officials. Their faces are carved with surprising individuality. One appears weary, another seems distracted, a third almost smiles. Human details survive even inside state propaganda. Outside the temple, evening wind moves cool air down from the cliffs. Musicians play soft harp melodies while priests chant prayers beneath emerging stars. The Nile below reflects scattered torchlight in trembling lines across dark water. For a moment, peace feels possible, and in many ways the Middle Kingdom truly becomes one of Egypt's most balanced eras. Trade expands again into Nubia and the Near East. Literature flourishes. Administrative systems strengthen. Artistic styles grow refined and emotionally expressive. Confidence returns carefully, not arrogantly yet. You spend several days travelling north through recovering farmland where workers clear canals choked by years of neglect. Villages once weakened by regional conflict now reconnect through expanding trade routes. Markets feel fuller. Grain prices stabilise somewhat, river traffic increases. Children born during reunification grow up expecting continuity rather than collapse. That psychological change shapes entire generations. One evening, during a river journey beneath fading orange skies, you share a small boat with a travelling scribe carrying literary texts between temple schools. He speaks passionately about new writings emerging during these years, stories exploring loyalty, grief, exile, wisdom, and moral uncertainty. Egyptian culture is becoming more inward-looking, more reflective. Perhaps hardship taught people to examine the human heart more honestly. The scribe reads aloud briefly from a copied text while oil lamps sway gently with the boat's movement. His voice blends with the soft sound of water against wood. Somewhere beyond the reeds, frogs pulse steadily through the darkness. The moment feels peaceful enough to trust, yet history never rests for long. Beyond Egypt's borders, neighbouring peoples watch this restored kingdom carefully. Trade routes widen into vulnerable corridors. Wealth attracts attention. Foreign powers strengthen. Desert frontiers remain difficult to control completely. And though Thebes now glows confidently beside the Nile beneath renewed royal authority, distant winds are already beginning to carry unfamiliar dangers toward the recovering land. The eastern wind carries unfamiliar voices. You hear them first in fragments drifting through crowded border markets near the Nile Delta. Different accents, strange weapon designs, merchants speaking cautiously about foreigners settling farther east beyond Egypt's traditional frontier zones. At first, nobody seems especially alarmed. Egypt has always traded with outsiders. Caravans arrive carrying cedarwood, copper, incense, lapis lazuli, and stories from distant lands. Foreign labourers sometimes settle near ports or military outposts. The world beyond the Nile never remains completely separate. But this feels different. The newcomers do not simply visit. They stay. You travel north into the delta where the Nile spreads outward into marshes, winding channels, and dense reed beds alive with insects and birds. The air here feels heavy with moisture. Mud clings thickly to sandals. Boats move constantly through narrow waterways crowded with fishermen, traders, soldiers, and tax officials trying unsuccessfully to monitor everything. The delta has always been difficult to control fully. Too open, too connected to surrounding regions. As Middle Kingdom authority weakens during later generations, Egypt's borders become increasingly porous. Internal political strain returns quietly. Royal succession grows less stable. Local officials regain influence. And into that uncertainty come groups from Western Asia later known collectively as the Hyksos, foreign rulers. Though even that phrase oversimplifies things. The Hyksos do not arrive all at once as a massive invading army crashing dramatically through Egypt's defences. Historians still debate many details. Some likely enter gradually through migration and trade networks, before political conditions allow them to seize power more directly. History often changes through slow accumulation before sudden transformation. You arrive at Avaris, the Hyksos capital in the delta, where Egyptian and foreign influences mix uneasily together. The city smells of livestock, sea wind, smoke, and damp wood from crowded docks. Narrow streets twist between workshops producing both Egyptian-style pottery and goods shaped by Levantine traditions. Nothing here feels entirely foreign. Nothing feels entirely Egyptian either. That unsettles people. A local brewer complains while pouring beer into clay cups that old customs are disappearing. Nearby, a merchant shrugs and points out that trade has improved under Hyksos administration. Grain still moves. Markets still function. Most families still wake concerned about ordinary survival rather than royal identity. Again, practical life shapes human loyalty more than grand ideology. Still, resentment grows. The Hyksos rulers adopt many Egyptian traditions to legitimize their authority. They use royal titles, worship local gods alongside their own deities, employ Egyptian scribes and administrators. Yet cultural tension remains impossible to erase completely, especially among southern Egyptians in Thebes. You notice something else too. Military technology is changing. At a training ground outside the city, Hyksos soldiers maneuver horse-drawn chariots across open terrain while Egyptian observers watch carefully. Horses remain relatively unfamiliar within Egypt at this time. Their smell hangs sharp in the air, mixed with leather harnesses and churned mud. The speed of the chariots feels startling. Archers fire from moving platforms with practiced coordination. Bronze weapons glint beneath harsh sunlight. Military organization grows more flexible and mobile than earlier Egyptian armies built largely around infantry and river transport. The Hyksos bring innovations Egypt cannot ignore, and Egyptians hate learning from conquerors. You spend an evening inside a household where a mixed family shares supper beneath oil lamps swaying gently from roof beams. The father works as a translator between Hyksos officials and local traders. His wife grew up in an Egyptian farming village further south. Their children speak both languages naturally. Identity becomes complicated during occupations. The mother admits quietly she misses older religious festivals from her childhood. The father replies that rulers change, but harvests remain difficult regardless. Their oldest son listens silently while sharpening a bronze knife beside the doorway. He belongs fully to neither world. That feeling will shape generations. Farther south, resistance strengthens gradually around Thebes. Native Egyptian rulers there continue governing independently despite Hyksos control over the north. Tension between north and south sharpens year after year. Official diplomacy masks growing hostility barely concealed beneath formal exchanges. You travel upriver again toward Thebes, where attitudes feel colder now whenever northern politics arise. Priests speak passionately about restoring proper order to Egypt. Nobles sponsor military preparations discreetly. Young soldiers train with increasing seriousness beside temple courtyards and river forts. Memory plays a powerful role here. Egyptians remember older ages of unity beneath native dynasties. Foreign rule feels humiliating not only politically but spiritually. The pharaoh traditionally maintains harmony between gods, land, and people. Outsiders occupying the delta seem to violate the natural order itself. At least that is how southern elites increasingly describe the situation. Yet ordinary life continues beneath these tensions because ordinary life always does. You walk through a riverside village at dusk where women grind grain beside open doors, while children chase each other through drifting smoke from cooking fires. Fishermen repair nets by fading light. Somewhere nearby, a baby cries briefly before settling again. The Hyksos exist mostly as distant politics here. Taxes matter more immediately. Flood levels matter more. Still, war approaches. You sense it in conversations stopping abruptly when strangers pass nearby. In the growing number of armed escorts travelling with trade caravans. In the way young men discuss military service with nervous excitement rather than indifference. One elderly priest tells you quietly beside a temple courtyard scented with incense and dust. Egypt remembers itself slowly. The sentence lingers. Because beneath occupation and cultural blending, something deeper survives along the Nile. Shared rituals, shared landscapes, shared memory carried through generations even during division. The Hyksos rule substantial parts of Egypt now, but their control remains incomplete emotionally. Southern dynasties grow stronger, military knowledge spreads, resentment hardens into ambition, and somewhere in Thebes, beneath banners stirring softly in the hot evening wind, rulers begin preparing not merely to resist foreign kings, but to destroy them. The war begins with memory long before it begins with blood. You feel it in Thebes before a single chariot rolls northward. Priests speak more fiercely during temple ceremonies. Military drills continue later into the evening beneath torchlight. Young recruits gather beside barracks listening to older veterans describe the humiliation of foreign rule in voices sharpened by years of resentment. The city breathes with contained anger. Morning sunlight spills across temple walls painted with the gods striking down enemies beneath the approving gaze of heaven. The imagery no longer feels symbolic. Officials discuss supplies, troop movements, and river transport with urgent precision. Blacksmiths hammer bronze weapons inside sweltering workshops where sparks leap through smoky air. Thebes prepares itself carefully, because defeating the Hyksos will require more than courage. It will require transformation. You walk beside military training grounds where horses stamp impatiently against the earth, while Egyptian soldiers practice maneuvering chariots once introduced by their foreign rivals. Leather harnesses creak sharply. Wheels grind through dust. Archers fire from moving platforms with increasing confidence. Egypt learns from humiliation instead of retreating from it. That becomes its strength. A commander named Amosi rises during these years, inheriting both the conflict and the dream of reunification from earlier Theban rulers. He's still young when the struggle intensifies, though war tends to age people quickly. Later inscriptions will celebrate his victories with polished certainty. But standing here among exhausted soldiers and supply wagons, the future feels far less guaranteed. You meet a veteran river officer supervising troop transport along the Nile. His left arm bears an old scar from earlier border fighting. While labourers load shields and grain sacks onto boats, he admits quietly that many soldiers fear the Hyksos chariots despite public bravado. Fear rarely disappears during war. People simply learn to carry it differently. The Nile itself becomes part of the campaign. Boats move constantly between southern strongholds carrying troops, weapons, food, and messages. Oars slap rhythmically against dark water beneath blazing skies. Mosquitoes swarm thickly near marshes during evening stops. Soldiers sleep wrapped in coarse linen beside muddy riverbanks, while distant jackals cry through the night. War feels uncomfortable most of the time. More waiting than charging, more heat than glory. Yet momentum slowly shifts southward toward Thebes. Egyptian armies push north in stages, reclaiming territory settlement by settlement. Some towns surrender quickly. Others resist behind defensive walls while civilians hide indoors, listening to bronze strike bronze somewhere beyond the streets. The emotional atmosphere changes as victories accumulate. Hope returns cautiously at first, then louder. You enter a reclaimed town where local residents gather nervously beside market squares still bearing signs of recent fighting. Burned timbers smell bitter beneath the afternoon heat. Damaged walls stand half-repaired. One woman sweeps shattered pottery from her doorway while muttering that kings fight wars and ordinary people rebuild afterward. History keeps proving her correct. Still, celebrations erupt when Egyptian banners rise over administrative buildings. Priests lead public ceremonies thanking the gods for restored order. Children follow marching soldiers through dusty streets with wide, fascinated eyes. Musicians play reed pipes late into the night while exhausted troops drink beer beside temporary campfires. Victory creates relief before it creates joy. You continue northward with advancing forces. The delta grows wetter and more difficult as river channels divide endlessly through reeds and marshland. Supply lines stretch thin. Insects bite constantly. Armor sticks against sweating skin beneath crushing humidity. Campaigns here require endurance more than spectacle. At Avaris, the Hyksos capital, resistance hardens. Fortifications loom above muddy terrain crowded with soldiers, refugees, livestock, and trade goods abandoned during the chaos. Smoke drifts across the skyline where outer districts burn. Chariots move rapidly through defensive positions, while archers watch from the walls. The siege feels tense and exhausting rather than heroic. Egyptian soldiers dig trenches beneath relentless sun. Water grows foul quickly in stagnant areas. Men argue from exhaustion over ration distributions and guard rotations. A young recruit vomits quietly before battle while pretending afterward nothing happened. Nearby, a seasoned officer pretends not to notice. Compassion survives strangely in war. When the city finally falls after prolonged conflict, the emotional release feels enormous and unsettling all at once. Some soldiers cheer wildly. Others simply collapse where they stand from exhaustion. Fires spread through parts of the city while civilians flee, carrying whatever belongings they can manage. And there, beneath drifting smoke and cries echoing through shattered streets, you witness one of history's oldest patterns. Liberation and destruction arriving together. Amosa pushes farther beyond Egypt afterward, pursuing remaining Hyksos forces into southern Canaan. Egypt no longer intends merely to defend itself. The trauma of occupation reshapes the kingdom psychologically. Future security, many leaders now believe, requires aggressive control over neighboring territories before threats can gather again. Fear expands empires almost as effectively as ambition. You return eventually to Thebes where celebrations transform the city. Temples overflow with offerings. Incense thickens the evening air. Priests proclaim divine favor restored to the two lands. Official inscriptions praise Amosa as liberator and unifier beneath the eternal blessing of the gods. People genuinely rejoice. Foreign rule has ended, but Egypt itself has changed profoundly during the struggle. The old inward-looking kingdom of pyramid builders is gone. In its place emerges a more militarized state shaped by warfare, border anxiety, and expanding ambition. Chariots, professional armies, and imperial campaigns now define royal power alongside temples and monuments. The new kingdom begins here. At night you stand beside the Nile while victory celebrations continue farther within the city. Music drifts softly through warm darkness. Torches shimmer across the river surface. Somewhere nearby, soldiers laugh too loudly after too much beer. trying perhaps to release months of fear from their bodies. The air smells of smoke, river water, sweat, and lotus perfume crushed beneath passing crowds. Egypt feels strong again. Stronger than before, perhaps, and like many nations emerging victorious from long humiliation, it begins believing strength itself can prevent future suffering. That belief will carry Egypt to astonishing heights, and eventually toward new dangers waiting far beyond the horizon. Empire arrives quietly at first, not as a single triumphant moment, but as a steady widening of horizons. More ships upon the Nile, more foreign languages heard in marketplaces, more tribute carried into temple storehouses beneath the watchful eyes of scribes who can barely keep pace with inventory records. Egypt grows wealthy again. Dangerously wealthy. You travel north from Thebes during the reign of Hatshepsut, one of the most remarkable rulers Egypt will ever produce, though many later kings will try uncomfortably hard to erase her memory. The Nile glitters beneath sharp morning sunlight, while royal barges move elegantly through calm water draped with painted sails and gold-trimmed fittings. The kingdom feels confident now, not merely restored after the Hyksos Wars, expanded. The new kingdom transforms Egypt into an imperial power stretching influence deep into Nubia and the Near East. Military campaigns secure trade routes and tribute. Foreign princes send gifts to maintain favourable relations. Gold pours northward from Nubian mines under brutal desert conditions few courtiers ever witnessed directly. At court, however, empire looks graceful. You arrive at Thebes during preparations for a major religious festival honouring Amun, the city's great god whose priesthood has grown immensely powerful alongside the monarchy. Temple avenues fill with priests carrying incense burners, while servants scatter flower petals across polished stone walkways. The air smells of myrrh, perfume oil, and heated limestone. Musicians tune harps beneath shaded courtyards. Noble families arrive dressed in fine linen so sheer it shifts almost transparently in the sunlight. Jewellery flashes at wrists and throats. Officials speak carefully because status at court now feels both rewarding and dangerous. Especially under Hatshepsut, she rules first as regent for the young Thutmose III, then gradually claims full pharaonic authority herself. Statues depict her with royal regalia traditionally reserved for male kings, including the ceremonial false beard of pharaohs. Egypt adapts because power often forces adaptation, yet tension lingers beneath the polished ceremonies. Some officials support her fully, others tolerate her rule because prosperity continues. A few almost certainly resent her deeply while remaining outwardly obedient. Courts everywhere contain smiling people who would prefer someone else on the throne. You walk through Karnak Temple while builders raise enormous obelisks toward the sky. The scale feels overwhelming. Columns tower overhead painted in vivid blues, reds, and golds still fresh enough to gleam brightly beneath torchlight. Hieroglyphs cover nearly every surface, recording victories, offerings, divine favour, and royal legitimacy. Stone becomes political memory here. Hatshepsut commissions ambitious building projects throughout Egypt. She also sponsors major trade expeditions, including famous voyages to the mysterious land of Punt, likely located somewhere near the Horn of Africa. You listen to sailors unloading exotic cargo along the river docks at Thebes. They describe strange coastlines, incense trees transported with roots intact, unfamiliar animals, and oppressive sea heat that clung to skin even after sunset. One sailor admits quietly he feared the open sea more than battle. The Nile feels understandable. The ocean does not. Trade enriches Egypt beyond material wealth alone. New ideas, artistic influences, technologies, and diplomatic relationships spread alongside goods. Yet empire also creates distance between rulers and ordinary labourers whose work sustains the system. You notice this sharply while travelling south toward Nubian territories under Egyptian control. The desert there feels harsher than anything near the Nile heartland. Wind burns against exposed skin. Mining settlements cling to survival among barren rock landscapes where water must be rationed carefully. labourers emerge from gold mines coated in sweat and dust. Eyes narrowed against relentless sunlight. Egyptian luxury begins here, in exhausted bodies. An overseer supervising the mines complains that court officials in Thebes speak endlessly about divine glory while never visiting the conditions producing their gold. Then he lowers his voice quickly after realizing who stands nearby. Criticism travels carefully in empires. Back in Thebes, court life continues shimmering with ritual elegance. During evening banquets, servants pour wine into painted cups, while musicians perform beside pools reflecting torchlight and drifting lotus flowers. Nobles recline upon cushioned seats discussing military campaigns, temple politics, and foreign tribute. The conversations sound relaxed. The atmosphere is not. Thutmose III grows older during Hatshepsut's reign. Publicly, he remains respectful. Privately, historians still debate the full emotional complexity between them. No clear agreement survives. Perhaps he genuinely accepted the arrangement for years. Perhaps resentment simmered beneath ceremonial loyalty. Human ambition rarely disappears peacefully. After Hatshepsut's death, Thutmose III assumes full authority and transforms Egypt further through military conquest. Campaigns into Syria and Canaan expand Egyptian dominance dramatically. Tribute floods into royal storehouses from subdued territories. Foreign princes send hostages to Egypt for education and political leverage. The empire reaches astonishing power. You accompany part of a military expedition northward through dusty roads lined with supply wagons and sweating infantry. Horses snort impatiently beside chariots, while officers study folded maps beneath the shade of sparse trees. Soldiers complain about blisters, insects, and stale bread more often than enemy armies. War remains stubbornly physical despite royal propaganda. At Megiddo, one of Thutmose's most famous campaigns, Egyptian forces confront rebellious coalitions from Canaanite cities. The battle becomes legendary later, though standing among the troops beforehand mostly feels tense and uncomfortable. Men sharpen weapons repeatedly because nervous hands need activity. Leather armor smells sour with sweat. Dust settles inside your mouth every time the wind shifts. Victory eventually secures Egyptian dominance across the region. Songs celebrate the Pharaohs' brilliance. Temple walls immortalize triumph beneath divine blessing. Yet you remember quieter moments more vividly. A wounded soldier asking for water. A young messenger trembling before delivering battlefield reports. The silence afterward when surviving troops finally realize they're still alive. Empire always contained such moments beneath its grand narratives. One evening, returning south along the Nile, you watch sunset spread across temple walls glowing red beside the river. Egypt appears invincible from this distance. Wealth pours inward, armies succeed abroad, monuments rise constantly toward the heavens, and yet within palace corridors scented by incense and polished cedarwood, rivalries deepen quietly. Priests gain enormous influence. Military leaders gather prestige. Royal succession remains vulnerable to human ego, desire, fear, and ambition. The empire shines brilliantly now, perhaps brightest just before the shadows begin gathering again. The sunlight feels harsher now. You notice it first in the city rising from the desert plains east of the Nile, where broad avenues stretch beneath an open sky almost painfully bright at midday. Dust swirls through unfinished courtyards. Fresh white stone reflects sunlight so fiercely you narrow your eyes instinctively. Everything here feels exposed, deliberately exposed. The city is called Akhetaten, Horizon of the Aten, and it exists because one man has decided Egypt must look upward differently. His name is Akhenaten, and he's about to disturb nearly every certainty the kingdom has built across centuries. You arrive during the height of his reign while labour crews still shape temples from pale limestone beneath relentless heat. The air smells of fresh plaster, sweat and dry desert wind. Workers carry baskets of rubble through streets that seem too wide, too empty, as though the city itself remains uncertain how to breathe. Akhenaten has abandoned Thebes, distanced himself from the immensely powerful priesthood of Amun, and elevated the Aten, the visible sun disk, above Egypt's traditional gods, not merely another important deity, the central divine force, possibly the only one truly deserving worship. The shift feels shocking. For generations, Egyptian religion has woven itself through every level of life. Local gods protect villages, great temple cults organize economies, priests guide rituals connecting humanity to cosmic balance. Entire communities depend financially and emotionally upon these sacred systems. Now much of that structure trembles. You walk through one of Akhetaten's open-air temples where sunlight pours directly onto offering tables covered with bread, flowers, incense, and fruit. Traditional temple sanctuaries often feel shadowed and mysterious, their inner chambers hidden deep within cool stone halls. Not here. Akhenaten rejects darkness. The Aten must be worshipped beneath visible sunlight itself. Priests move quietly between offerings, while hymns rise into the burning air. The heat presses against your skin like physical weight. There is nowhere to hide from the sun inside these sacred spaces. Perhaps that is partly the point. You finally see Akhenaten during a ceremonial procession, moving slowly through the city avenues. His appearance unsettles you immediately, though historians still debate how accurately artistic depictions reflect reality. He appears elongated, almost fragile. Narrow shoulders, prominent hips, delicate features unlike earlier pharaohs carved with muscular certainty. Beside him walks Nefertiti, calm, elegant, watching everything carefully. The royal family occupies an unusually intimate role within Aten worship. Relief carvings show them embracing children beneath rays of sunlight ending in tiny hands offering blessings. The imagery feels startlingly personal compared to older royal art. Human tenderness suddenly appears in official imagery. A child leaning against her mother. A king kissing a daughter gently. Moments previous dynasties rarely emphasized publicly. And yet despite these softer images, the emotional atmosphere around Akhenaten's revolution feels tense. You sense uncertainty everywhere. At workshops, artisans scrape older gods' names from monuments under official orders. Temple incomes tied to Amun shrink dramatically. Priests displaced from traditional cult centers whisper bitterly in private gatherings. Some adapt outwardly, others do not. A former temple singer from Thebes tells you quietly over supper that she no longer recognizes the kingdom she grew up serving. She misses the old festivals, the crowded processions, the familiar comfort of rituals repeated since childhood. The old gods listened, she says softly. Then she glances toward the doorway before speaking further. Even in Akhetaten, caution surrounds conversation. The city itself feels strangely unfinished emotionally. People live here because the king commands it, not because generations rooted them to the landscape. Streets remain filled with migrants adjusting uneasily to sudden relocation. Government officials perform loyalty enthusiastically while privately navigating enormous uncertainty. And always above them burns the sun, relentless, beautiful, exhausting. One afternoon, you walk through residential districts where ordinary families attempt normal life beneath revolutionary ideology. Women grind grain beside shaded doorways. Children chase dogs through dusty alleys. Scribes complain about shortages of decent reed pens. Daily life continues stubbornly even while theology transforms overhead. Yet emotional fractures appear quietly. A craftsman admits he still keeps small household statues of older gods hidden inside storage jars. His wife worries informers might discover them. Their youngest daughter asks innocent questions about why familiar festivals vanished. No one answers comfortably. Meanwhile, beyond Akhetaten's bright avenues, Egypt's empire begins straining. Foreign rulers send increasingly anxious letters requesting military support against rising threats in Syria and Canaan. Some surviving correspondence from this era reveals desperate appeals largely ignored by Akhenaten's court. The king seems consumed by spiritual transformation while imperial stability weakens. Courtiers notice. Military officials notice. Priests certainly notice. One evening, you attend a royal ceremony at sunset. Akhenaten and Nefertiti stand upon a raised platform while the Aten's final rays spread across the city in brilliant orange light. Musicians play softly. Incense drifts upward through heated air still radiating warmth from the stone streets. For a brief moment, the vision almost works emotionally. The open sky, the glowing horizon, the sense of direct connection between humanity and divine light. You understand why some followers become devoted sincerely rather than merely obediently. Then darkness arrives, and with it comes discomfort. Traditional Egyptian religion offered protection through countless gods connected to every aspect of existence. Birth, death, floods, illness, fertility, travel, grief. The Aten feels vast but distant by comparison. Beautiful, perhaps, yet strangely impersonal. The city cools after sunset. Families retreat indoors. Oil lamps flicker behind thin windows somewhere nearby. Someone quietly sings an old hymn no longer encouraged publicly. The sound feels almost rebellious. Akhenaten continues building his radiant vision while opposition deepens invisibly around him. Egypt remains outwardly stable, but beneath the surface, resentment gathers among priests, generals, officials, and ordinary people longing for familiar order. And the desert city itself already carries the feeling of something temporary, like a dream too bright to survive the night. The city begins dying before anyone admits it aloud. You feel the change in Akhenaten immediately. Streets once crowded with labourers and royal officials now seem quieter beneath the hard desert sunlight. Workshops still function. Priests still perform rituals to the Aten. Royal decrees continue arriving from palace compounds painted in fading colours. But uncertainty hangs everywhere now. Akhenaten is gone. No clear agreement survives about his final years or the precise sequence afterward. Historians still debate the details. What remains undeniable is the atmosphere left behind. Egypt feels emotionally exhausted by religious upheaval, political neglect, and the growing sense that the old balance between gods, kingship, and ordinary life has fractured dangerously. And into that fragile world steps a child. Tutankhaten at first, later more famously Tutankhamen. You see him during a carefully staged public appearance within a palace courtyard, where officials hover nearby like anxious birds. He's very young, smaller than expected. Gold jewellery glitters against ceremonial linen while attendants adjust details constantly around him. He does not rule alone. That much feels obvious immediately. Power gathers instead around experienced advisors, military figures, and court officials eager to stabilize the kingdom after years of disruption. Among them stands Isir, elderly and calculating. Nearby is Horemheb, a military commander whose controlled expression reveals almost nothing. The adults surrounding the boy carry the true weight of Egypt's future. You walk through palace corridors where servants move quickly across cool stone floors, scented faintly with cedar oil and incense. Conversations stop whenever strangers approach. Scribes carry sealed messages between offices at all hours. Everyone seems careful not only about what they say, but how loudly they breathe. Courts become dangerous during uncertain succession. Soon the changes begin openly. The young king's name shifts from Tutankhaten to Tutankhamen, restoring honour to Amun and signalling Egypt's gradual return to traditional religion. Temples dedicated to older gods reopen. Priests regain influence. Royal support flows once more toward Thebes. Akhenaten starts emptying. Families pack belongings beneath drifting desert dust. Administrative offices close. Artisans dismantle workshops that once served the radiant city of the Aten. Cartwheels creak heavily through streets growing quieter each week. You watch one household preparing to leave. The father wraps tools carefully in linen while his wife seals clay jars for the journey south. Their daughter asks whether the sun god abandoned the city or whether the city abandoned him. Neither parent answers directly, because how do you explain political reversal to a child, especially when adults barely understand it themselves? The return to older traditions feels emotional as much as religious. In Thebes, festivals honouring Amun erupt with enormous relief. Temple musicians perform before packed crowds. Incense fills long processional avenues lined with cheering citizens, grateful for familiar rituals restored after years of disruption. Memory comforts people during unstable times, even imperfect memory. One elderly priest weeps openly while touching the carved walls of a reopened sanctuary neglected during Akhenaten's reign. His hands tremble slightly against the cool stone. Nearby, younger attendants watch him with uncertain respect, aware they are witnessing not merely religious restoration but generational healing. Still, Egypt remains politically fragile beneath the ceremonies. Foreign territories weaken. Imperial influence slips in parts of the Near East. Court rivalries deepen quietly around the young king, and Tutankhamun himself appears physically vulnerable. Modern examinations suggest significant health problems. You notice his careful movements during formal processions, the occasional stiffness hidden behind royal choreography. He is both king and child simultaneously. That contradiction follows him everywhere. At night, inside palace chambers lit by flickering oil lamps, advisors debate military concerns and diplomatic tensions, while the boy pharaoh sleeps nearby beneath linen sheets embroidered with protective symbols. Outside, guards patrol shadowed courtyards, listening to desert wind move softly through columns. Nobody trusts stability fully anymore. You accompany a hunting expedition organized partly for royal image-making. Chariots race across desert edges beneath enormous skies, while attendants release trained dogs into scrubland, where gazelles scatter through the dust. The king participates carefully. Too carefully. Several courtiers exchange worried glances whenever he stumbles mounting the chariot. Yet public appearances must project vitality. Egypt desperately wants reassurance after the chaos of Akhenaten's revolution. So the performance continues. Young king, restored gods, renewed order. But beneath the surface, mortality waits quietly. Tutankhamun dies unexpectedly around 18 or 19 years old. The precise cause remains uncertain. Historians continue debating illness, injury, inherited conditions, or combinations of many factors. What survives more clearly is the emotional aftermath. Shock, urgency, fear. Inside royal workshops, embalmers and craftsmen work frantically preparing burial goods for a king whose death arrives too soon. Goldsmiths hammer delicate funerary pieces late into the night, while incense thickens the air inside crowded preparation chambers. Scribes revise inscriptions hurriedly. Tomb arrangements feel improvised compared to grander royal burials planned over decades. Everything happens too fast. You stand quietly near the Valley of the Kings while funeral processions wind through barren cliffs beneath a pale desert sky. Priests chant ancient prayers meant to guide the king safely into eternity. Mourners carry offerings of flowers, oils, furniture, weapons, jewelry, and food into the tomb chambers. The famous golden mask waits among them, though no one here imagines it will someday become perhaps the most recognizable object from ancient Egypt. For now, it is simply part of a desperate attempt to protect a dead young man in the afterlife. The burial itself feels intimate compared to older monumental funerals. Smaller, sadder somehow, a brief life wrapped carefully in astonishing beauty. Then the tomb seals shut. Darkness settles over the valley once more, and outside, Egypt moves forward quickly because kingdoms cannot pause long for grief. Ai takes the throne afterward. Horemheb watches carefully. Political maneuvering resumes almost immediately beneath polished rituals of mourning. The old gods return fully, Akhenaten's memory begins systematic erasure, and the boy king disappears into silence beneath desert stone, forgotten by history for more than 3,000 years while empires rise and fall above him. The statues arrive before the man does. You see them standing against the desert horizon, enormous faces carved from stone, calm and eternal beneath the burning sun. Workers swarm around unfinished temples carrying tools, water jars, and baskets of rubble while overseers shout through clouds of drifting dust. Everywhere you travel now, one name follows you. Ramses, Ramses, Ramses. By the time Ramses II takes the throne, Egypt already carries generations of imperial ambition behind it. Armies patrol distant territories. Temples overflow with wealth. Court ceremony has become an art form polished through centuries of royal performance. But Ramses intends something larger. Not merely power, memory. He wants Egypt to remember him forever. And in many ways it will. You arrive in Ramesses, his grand royal capital in the eastern delta, where horses stamp impatiently inside enormous stables and foreign envoys move through palace courtyards, carrying tribute beneath brightly painted banners. The city smells of mud brick, sweat, perfume oils, and animal heat rising heavily into the afternoon air. Everything feels crowded with motion. Messengers race between administrative offices. Chariot wheels grind across packed earth streets. Bronze armor flashes beneath sunlight sharp enough to hurt your eyes. Ramses himself appears surprisingly energetic despite the endless ceremonial burden surrounding him. He moves through court with practiced confidence, aware constantly of being watched. His voice carries easily through audience halls lined with painted columns and polished stone floors cool beneath sandaled feet. He understands theatre instinctively. That may be his greatest political gift. At banquets, musicians play while servants carry roasted duck, figs, wine, and honey cakes between reclining nobles discussing diplomacy and military campaigns. Ramses listens carefully, even while appearing relaxed. His attention flickers constantly across the room, measuring loyalty, admiration, uncertainty. Kings survive partly through performance. Great kings know it. You travel northward with the royal army during preparations for conflict against the Hittite Empire, Egypt's major rival in the Near East. Tension hums through those camps long before battle begins. Leather tents stretch across dusty plains. Soldiers sharpen bronze blades beside cook fires, sending greasy smoke into dry evening air. The campaign toward Kadesh becomes legendary later. Living through it feels far less glorious. The march itself is exhausting. Dust coats skin and lungs. Water supplies require obsessive management. Horses grow skittish in unfamiliar terrain. Young recruits joke loudly to conceal fear while veterans sit silently repairing equipment beneath fading light. One chariot driver admits quietly that battle terrifies him every single time. He says only fools stop feeling fear. At Kadesh, confusion erupts almost immediately. Egyptian forces advance farther than expected, while intelligence reports prove disastrously inaccurate. Hittite chariots strike suddenly with terrifying speed. Horses scream. Bronze crashes against bronze. Men disappear beneath wheels and dust clouds so thick they swallow entire sections of the battlefield. The smell becomes unforgettable. Sweat, blood, hot leather, panicked animals. Ramses later portrays the battle as a magnificent personal triumph, and official inscriptions celebrate his bravery with enormous confidence. Temple walls across Egypt depict the king heroically scattering enemies, almost single-handedly beneath divine protection. Reality feels more complicated. Accounts differ. Historians still debate the exact military outcome. Egypt avoids catastrophic defeat, but decisive victory remains uncertain. Much of the royal narrative serves political image-making as much as objective record. And perhaps Ramses understands something uncomfortable about history. People often remember certainty more easily than nuance. Back in Egypt, monumental construction expands almost obsessively. Ramses commissioned temples, statues, obelisks, and inscriptions across the kingdom on a scale few rulers ever attempt. At Abu Simbel, colossal seated figures of the king stare outward above the Nile with unnerving calm. You stand beneath those statues at sunrise while the cliffs glow deep red beneath the morning light. The scale distorts human perspective completely. Workers below appear insect small beside the carved knees and immense stone faces. A labourer carrying limestone tools mutters that the king intends to outlive the mountains themselves. Perhaps he does, yet beneath the grandeur, ordinary exhaustion accumulates quietly. Construction crews labour beneath brutal heat year after year. Quarry dust settles into lungs. Overseers push deadlines relentlessly because royal ambition never sleeps. At workers' villages near western Thebes, families complain softly about shortages, injuries, and rising obligations. One stone carver flexes swollen fingers beside an evening fire while his wife massages oil into cracked skin darkened by years beneath the sun. He wants eternity, the man says quietly. Stone costs flesh. The sentence stays with you. Ramses fathers enormous numbers of children. Royal processions overflow with sons and daughters dressed in elaborate linen and gold jewellery during festivals honouring the gods. Queen Nefertari stands beside him often, intelligent and composed, her presence softening some of the harsher edges of royal spectacle. When she dies, Ramses mourns deeply enough to commission one of Egypt's most beautiful tombs in her honour. Even powerful men grieve privately. Time moves strangely during long reigns. Ramses rules for decades. Generations grow up knowing no other king. Young soldiers become old veterans beneath his banners. Children born during early campaigns eventually watch their own sons join the army. And slowly, almost invisibly, age begins touching the empire itself. Foreign pressures increase around Egypt's borders. Economic strain deepens beneath monumental spending. Climate instability and migration ripple across the eastern Mediterranean world. New threats gather beyond the comfortable certainty of palace rituals and temple ceremonies. Still, the performances continue. At Karnak and Luxor, festivals flood the streets with music, incense, flowers, and torchlight reflecting across the Nile after dark. Priests carry sacred barks through cheering crowds, while dancers move barefoot over cool stone pavements, washed clean before the ceremonies. Egypt still shines brilliantly, but the brightness feels heavier now, more deliberate, as though everyone senses something difficult approaching yet refuses to speak its name aloud. Late one evening you stand beside the river watching torchlight flicker against distant temple walls, covered endlessly with Ramses' image. The king has carved himself into Egypt so thoroughly it almost seems impossible to imagine the kingdom without him. Yet history always continues after great men die, and sometimes the shadows waiting afterward prove larger than the monuments they leave behind. The sea begins bringing strangers. You hear rumours first along the delta ports where fishermen speak uneasily about burned coastal towns farther north. Merchant ships arrive damaged, sails torn by storms or conflict. Refugees step onto Egyptian docks carrying exhausted children, broken tools, and stories nobody fully understands yet. Entire kingdoms are collapsing beyond the horizon, and Egypt can feel the tremors. By now, Ramses II is gone. The long certainty of his reign has faded into memory, followed by weaker successors struggling to carry the enormous weight of empire he helped create. Temples still stand magnificent beneath the sun. Priests still chant before sacred statues. Royal inscriptions still proclaim divine stability. But the world surrounding Egypt has changed. Trade routes fracture unpredictably. Drought and famine spread through parts of the eastern Mediterranean. Cities burn. Populations move. Old alliances vanish beneath violence and desperation. And toward Egypt come the Sea Peoples. Even now, historians debate exactly who they were. Not one nation, perhaps, but shifting groups driven by migration, warfare, hunger, or collapse elsewhere. Contemporary Egyptian records portray them as dangerous invaders arriving by land and sea with families, wagons, and weapons. The fear they inspire feels very real. You travel north toward the Nile Delta during the reign of Ramses III, one of the last pharaohs capable of projecting genuine strength against external threats. Defensive preparations fill the region. Fortifications rise near vulnerable river mouths. Archers train relentlessly beside muddy waterways buzzing with insects beneath oppressive heat. The atmosphere feels tense rather than triumphant. Egypt remembers too well what foreign domination once felt like. At military camps, soldiers repair shields beneath canvas awnings while officers study coastal reports carried by exhausted messengers. Bronze weapons lie stacked carefully beside bundles of arrows and coiled rope. Horses stamp nervously in the humidity. One veteran mutters that enemies arriving with entire families behind them fight differently, more desperately. That observation unsettles everyone nearby. You stand beside defensive positions overlooking marshy channels where Egyptian naval forces prepare for confrontation. Boats crowd the waterways. Archers wait silently with bows already strung. Sweat trickles beneath armor while dragonflies skim low across stagnant water. The battle, when it comes, erupts with terrifying chaos. Enemy ships push into the delta channels while Egyptian forces trap them within narrow waterways. Arrows darken the air briefly. Men scream in languages you do not recognize. Boats collide violently against hidden obstacles and one another. River mud churns black beneath struggling bodies. The Nile itself seems to fight alongside Egypt. Ramses III later immortalizes the victory in grand temple reliefs showing enemies crushed beneath royal power. And to be fair, Egypt does survive the invasions better than many neighbouring states. But survival carries a cost. The war drains resources already strained by wider economic instability. Maintaining armies, fortifications, and royal administration becomes increasingly difficult. Grain shortages spread intermittently. Corruption deepens. Confidence weakens beneath official displays of strength. You feel the tension most sharply in ordinary conversations. At a market near Thebes, merchants complain quietly about rising prices while pretending loyalty whenever officials pass nearby. Bread grows smaller. Beer tastes thinner. Taxes remain relentless despite worsening conditions. A woman selling onions beside the Temple Avenue laughs bitterly when someone praises the kingdom's victories. "You cannot eat victories," she says. No one argues. The workers at Deir el-Medina, the village housing artisans responsible for royal tomb construction, begin experiencing delayed grain payments from the state. That matters enormously. These are skilled labourers connected directly to the royal burial system itself. When their rations fail to arrive properly, they do something astonishing. They strike. You walk among them during one of history's earliest recorded labour protests. Men sit outside administrative buildings refusing work while scribes scramble nervously between officials. The workers are not revolutionary dreamers. They are hungry craftsmen demanding promised food. One tomb painter rubs dust from his eyes and says quietly, "We carve eternity while our children starve." Again, nobody nearby disagrees. Inside temple complexes, priesthoods grow wealthier even as royal authority weakens. Vast estates attached to major temples control land, labour, and grain distribution across Egypt. The balance between pharaoh and priesthood shifts dangerously. Power fragments slowly from within. At night, Thebes still glows beautifully beside the Nile. Torchlight reflects across temple columns painted in fading blues and reds. Incense drifts through cool courtyards, while hymns echo against stone darkened by centuries of smoke. The beauty remains real. That is important to remember. Decline rarely looks like endless ruin. People still fall in love. Musicians still perform during festivals. Children still splash along the riverbanks beneath afternoon heat. Human life continues even while civilizations weaken around it. Yet something emotional has changed permanently. The old certainty is gone. Earlier dynasties believed Egypt existed beneath divine protection guaranteed through proper rituals and strong kingship. Now foreign invasions, economic strain, corruption, and political fragmentation expose uncomfortable truths. No kingdom remains eternal. Not even Egypt. You travel one evening through the Valley of the Kings, where royal tombs hide beneath barren cliffs, glowing pale beneath moonlight. Guards patrol nervously because tomb robberies increase during these unstable years. Gold buried with dead pharaohs tempts desperate living people. The irony feels cruel. Kings built elaborate afterlives while workers struggle for grain nearby. A desert wind moves softly through the valley, carrying the smell of dust and cold stone. Somewhere distant, a jackal cries into the darkness. You realize Egypt is entering a different kind of age now. Not sudden collapse. Something slower, a long wearing down. The monuments still tower above the Nile. Priests still speak of cosmic order. Pharaohs still appear in ceremonial splendor before gathered crowds. But beneath the painted surfaces and sacred rituals, the kingdom is growing tired. And tired empires become vulnerable in ways stone alone cannot prevent. The thieves move at night. You imagine tomb robbery as dramatic at first. Torches flickering through hidden corridors. Curses whispered against the dead. Gold glittering beneath centuries of dust. The reality feels smaller, hungrier, more human. You stand in western Thebes near the Valley of the Kings, where barren cliffs rise like broken teeth against the pale dawn sky. Cold air lingers briefly before the desert heat returns. Somewhere below, the Nile glimmers softly beyond cultivated fields, already filling with workers beginning another difficult day. The royal tombs remain hidden beneath these cliffs, packed with treasures meant to sustain pharaohs eternally after death. But eternity grows expensive during hard times. Egypt's central authority continues weakening through these later New Kingdom years. Dynasties shorten, political intrigue deepens, foreign influence presses from multiple directions. Temple priesthoods hold enormous wealth while royal administrations struggle increasingly to pay laborers consistently. Desperation spreads quietly, and desperate people begin looking toward the dead. You walk through Deir el-Medina, the tightly organized village housing artisans who carve and decorate royal tombs. The settlement smells of baking bread, dust, sweat, and smoke trapped between narrow mud brick lanes. Chickens dart beneath woven laundry lines, while children carry water jars almost too heavy for their arms. These workers know the tombs intimately, every hidden passage, every sealed chamber, every weakness in the stone. That knowledge becomes dangerous. At first, most theft likely happens gradually. Small objects disappear, precious metals trimmed quietly from burial furnishings, minor officials bribed into silence, a necklace missing here, a ceremonial cup there. Then conditions worsen. Grain shortages intensify during some years. Political instability grows. Corruption spreads through local administration and even temple systems, supposedly guarding sacred spaces. Entire tombs become targets. You sit one evening beside a tomb worker named Naktmin while he repairs cracked sandals near his doorway. His hands are stained with pigment from wall paintings. He speaks softly because neighbors remain nearby. He says he never imagined people would steal from pharaohs. Then he pauses. I never imagined my son would go hungry either. The sentence hangs heavily between you. History often judges desperation harshly from safe distances. The valley itself feels eerie after sunset. Wind slips through the cliffs, carrying fine dust across hidden entrances sealed beneath stone and rubble. Guards patrol nervously with oil lamps and bronze weapons, while jackals cry somewhere beyond the ridges. Everyone knows robberies are happening. The question becomes who profits from them. You attend an official investigation inside a dim administrative chamber lit by flickering lamps that smell sharply of burning oil. Scribes record testimony onto papyrus while accused men kneel sweating before local authorities. One confesses to entering a royal tomb through tunnels cut carefully into surrounding rock. His voice shakes, not from guilt alone, from fear of punishment. The stolen goods were divided among workers, intermediaries, and corrupt officials protecting the operation. Gold melted quickly becomes anonymous. Sacred objects disappear into hidden trade networks, feeding entire underground economies built upon the remains of kings. Even priests become suspected sometimes, especially priests, because temple institutions now control enormous wealth while political authority fragments around them. You realize something unsettling standing inside these investigations. The boundary between guardian and thief has blurred. A tomb guard supplements his ration shortages by accepting bribes. A scribe alters records slightly to conceal missing objects. Local officials publicly condemn robberies while privately taking shares from recovered treasure. Civilization decays through countless small compromises before grand collapse arrives. And still life continues. Women wash clothing beside irrigation canals beneath bright afternoon skies. Fishermen cast nets from reed boats drifting silently through papyrus marshes. Festivals still fill temple courtyards with music, incense, and flowers during sacred celebrations. Egypt remains beautiful. That is what makes decline feel so strange. At Karnak, priests conduct elaborate ceremonies before towering columns blackened by centuries of incense smoke. Sacred chants echo through cool stone halls, while sunlight pours between gateways carved generations earlier during stronger dynasties. The rituals survive, but beneath them, anxiety deepens. You speak with a young temple scribe responsible for inventory records. He complains quietly about endless disputes between royal officials and priesthood administrators over land, grain, and labor rights. Everyone protects their own interests now. Cooperation weakens. People trust walls more than rulers, he says while sealing storage accounts. Outside, the temple walls rise massive and eternal beneath the sun. Inside, the humans managing them look exhausted. One night, you accompany a patrol through the valley after reports of suspicious movement near recently sealed tomb entrances. The moon casts pale silver light across the cliffs. Sand crunches softly beneath sandals. The guards speak little. Then they find footprints, fresh, a hidden passage broken open behind loose stone. Inside the tunnel, the air smells stale and ancient. Dust swirls in the lamplight while shadows jump across painted walls, showing gods guiding dead kings through the afterlife. Coffins lie damaged, gold leaf stripped away, burial linens torn carelessly aside during frantic searching. The silence feels unbearable, not because treasures vanished, because memory itself seems violated. Yet even here, you cannot fully hate the thieves. Some are certainly greedy, others brutal, but many emerge from the same struggling communities tasked originally with honouring the dead. Hunger bends morality gradually, and perhaps the pharaohs themselves helped create this temptation. They buried unimaginable wealth beneath a land where ordinary families increasingly struggle to survive. As generations pass, royal burials become smaller, more secretive, less grand. Egypt no longer possesses the resources or confidence for massive funerary projects on earlier scales. Political fragmentation deepens further. Foreign powers watch carefully from beyond the borders. The old world is fading. You stand before dawn beside the Nile while mist rises softly from the water. Temple bells echo faintly through distant Thebes. Across the river, the Valley of the Kings rests silent beneath the cliffs, hiding robbed tombs and broken dreams of immortality. The pharaohs once believed stone, gold, and sacred ritual could preserve their names forever. Instead, it is the fragile memories of workers, thieves, grieving families, and exhausted priests that linger most vividly beside the river now. Foreign kings now wear the crowns of Egypt. Once, that sentence would have sounded impossible beside the Nile. The two lands imagined themselves eternal, protected by divine order older than memory itself. Yet centuries of weakened dynasties, internal rivalries, economic strain, and shifting empires beyond Egypt's borders have slowly changed the balance of the world. Power no longer flows only from the Nile outward. Now it arrives from elsewhere too. You travel south toward Nubia, where the river narrows between harsh desert cliffs glowing copper beneath the late afternoon sun. Hot wind carries the smell of stone, river reeds, and distant cooking fires drifting from settlements pressed close against the water. This land has always mattered deeply to Egypt. Trade routes pass through here. Gold flows northward from Nubian mines. Military campaigns once pushed aggressively into these territories during Egypt's imperial height. Now history turns strangely in the opposite direction. The Nubian kingdom of Kush rises powerfully from the south, centered at Napata beneath the sacred mountain called Jebel Barkal. Its rulers admire Egyptian religion, language, arts, and kingship traditions deeply. They do not arrive intending to erase Egypt. They intend to inherit it. You first encounter Nubian royal envoys arriving at Thebes during a temple festival, honouring Amun. Their clothing differs subtly from Egyptian styles. Their accents carry southern rhythms, yet they participate comfortably within rituals familiar along the Nile for centuries. The priests welcome them warmly. That part surprises you, but it makes sense. By now, many Egyptian elites care less about ethnicity than about preserving sacred traditions and political stability. Nubian rulers respect the old gods sincerely. They support temple institutions. They present themselves as restorers rather than destroyers. And Egypt, weary from fragmentation, responds. Eventually, a Kushite king named Pierre marches northward, bringing much of Egypt beneath Nubian control. His campaign inscriptions speak passionately about restoring proper religious order and moral discipline to a divided land. You follow portions of the army north along the Nile. Soldiers travel beside the river carrying shields of leather and wood, darkened by heat and sweat. Horses snort impatiently during rest stops while officers study local alliances carefully. The campaign feels disciplined rather than savage. Many Egyptian cities surrender with limited resistance. Rival local rulers bicker among themselves too deeply to mount unified opposition. Priests in important temple centres often cooperate willingly with the Nubian kings, recognizing shared devotion to traditional religion. One elderly temple official in Thebes tells you quietly, "The gods care about offerings, not accents." A practical theology. Under the Kushite pharaohs, Egypt experiences something unusual, a revival. Ancient traditions receive renewed attention. Temple construction expands again in some regions. Artistic styles deliberately echo earlier periods of Egyptian greatness. The Nubian rulers seem almost more devoted to preserving classical Egyptian identity than many recent Egyptian dynasties themselves. History enjoys irony. You visit royal workshops where artisans carve statues blending Nubian features with traditional pharaonic iconography. Incense drifts through shaded halls while stoneworkers chip carefully beneath painted images of Amun, Osiris, and Horus. The atmosphere feels calmer than during earlier eras of decline, yet unease remains, because farther beyond Egypt's borders, another empire grows relentlessly stronger, Assyria. The name travels through merchant conversations and diplomatic reports with increasing frequency. Assyrian armies dominate much of the Near East through terrifying military efficiency. Their kings demand tribute, obedience, and fear in equal measure. You meet a caravan trader, arriving from the Levant, whose hands still shake slightly while describing Assyrian sieges. "They do not stop," he says softly, beside a riverside inn crowded with travellers and smoke. Nobody nearby speaks for several moments afterward. The Kushite rulers attempt balancing diplomacy, military resistance, and traditional kingship. But Egypt's resources no longer match the enormous imperial systems rising elsewhere. The world itself is becoming more interconnected, more militarized, more unstable. At Memphis, you watch officials debate defensive preparations while scribes record grain supplies and troop estimates with anxious precision. Outside, ordinary market life continues. Bakers shape bread, children chase stray dogs through crowded streets, musicians perform beside beer stalls during evening festivals. Life never fully pauses for geopolitical dread. Still, war arrives eventually. Assyrian campaigns push into Egypt with brutal determination during the 7th century BCE. Cities fall, alliances fracture. Nubian rulers retreat southward under immense pressure. The violence feels sharper than earlier conflicts, shaped by empires operating on frightening scales. You witness refugees arriving along the Nile carrying bundles of clothing, damaged household gods, and exhausted children asleep against their shoulders. Smoke darkens parts of the northern horizon for days. An old woman sitting beside the river mutters bitterly that Egypt once frightened the world. Now it waits to see who enters next. The sentence hurts because it feels true. Yet even amid invasions and political collapse, Egyptian traditions survive stubbornly. Priests continue rituals. Farmers still plant beside the floodwaters. Funerary practices endure. Sacred hymns echo through temple courtyards blackened by age and smoke. Civilizations rarely disappear cleanly. They adapt, absorb, transform. You travel finally back south toward Nubia, where the Kushite kings maintain their own powerful kingdom beyond direct Egyptian control. There, beneath enormous skies and desert stars, temples still honor Egyptian gods beside distinctly Nubian landscapes and customs. The cultural exchange runs deeper than conquest alone ever could. One evening near Napata, you stand beside the Nile while musicians play drums softly beneath torchlight. The river moves black and silent through the darkness, exactly as it did for the first farming villages thousands of years earlier. Empires rise, empires fall, but human beings continue borrowing from one another, reshaping old identities into new forms no ruler fully controls. And Egypt, though weakened, refuses entirely to vanish. Not yet. The harbour smells of salt, olive oil, wet rope, and ambition. You arrive in Alexandria at dawn while gulls wheel above crowded docks lined with ships from every corner of the Mediterranean. Sailors shout in Greek, Egyptian, Phoenician, and languages you cannot place. Immediately. Cargo nets creak overhead carrying wine jars, papyrus bundles, spices, grain, and polished marble unloaded beneath the growing heat. Nothing in old Egypt prepared the Nile for a city like this. Alexandria feels restless, bright, hungry. Centuries have passed since the Nubian kings and Assyrian invasions. Persian rulers came and went. Native dynasties struggled repeatedly to reclaim stability. Then, in the 4th century BCE, Alexander the Great swept through Egypt almost astonishingly quickly. He stayed only briefly, but the world he left behind changed everything. After Alexander's death, one of his generals, Ptolemy, seized control of Egypt and founded a Greek dynasty that would rule the land for nearly 3 centuries. The Ptolemies adopt pharaonic titles and participate in Egyptian religious traditions. Yet their court remains deeply Greek in language, education, and political culture. Egypt becomes something layered now, ancient and newly foreign at once. You move through Alexandria's broad avenues where sunlight flashes across white limestone buildings, unlike older Egyptian cities pressed tightly beside the Nile. Colonnades cast long, cool shadows over philosophers, debating beneath painted porticos. Street vendors sell figs, fish stew, and honey pastries beside shrines honouring both Greek and Egyptian gods. The city feels intellectually alive in a way few places ever have. At the Great Library of Alexandria, scribes copy texts endlessly while scholars argue over mathematics, astronomy, medicine, poetry, and philosophy from dawn until late evening. Papyrus scrolls fill storage rooms scented with dust, ink and cedar oil used against insects. Knowledge itself becomes imperial here. A librarian complains jokingly that the scholars fight more viciously over grammar than soldiers do over territory. You believe him. Yet beneath the brilliance, tension hums constantly. The Ptolemaic rulers depend heavily upon Greek elites, soldiers, and administrators, while the majority of Egypt's population remains culturally Egyptian. Different legal systems operate side by side. Different languages dominate different spaces. Wealth concentrates sharply around court circles and urban centres. You feel the divide clearly travelling inland from Alexandria toward older Nile communities. In one farming village near the Fayum oasis, Egyptian labourers complained quietly about taxes collected by Greek-speaking officials who barely understand local customs. The fields still smell wonderfully alive after the flood season. Wet earth clings thickly to sandals. Children still chase ibis birds along irrigation ditches, but resentment lingers beneath daily life. An elderly farmer says the rulers worship Egyptian gods publicly while counting Egyptian grain privately. Again, nobody nearby disagrees. At court, however, the Ptolemies present themselves as legitimate pharaohs. Temple walls depict them making offerings to ancient deities exactly like native dynasties before them. Priests often cooperate willingly because royal patronage keeps temples wealthy and influential. Politics and religion continue their long Egyptian marriage. You attend a festival honouring Isis in Alexandria where Greek and Egyptian traditions blend almost seamlessly. Incense curls through torch-lit streets crowded with worshippers carrying flowers and singing hymns beside the sea wind. Greek women wear Egyptian amulets. Egyptian priests speak Greek phrases during formal ceremonies. Cultures merge unevenly but genuinely. That complexity fascinates you. The famous lighthouse of Alexandria towers above the harbour at night, its fire visible for enormous distances across dark Mediterranean waters. Sailors speak of it with near religious awe. Standing beneath it, you feel tiny against both architecture and history. Egypt has become part of a larger interconnected world now. Mediterranean politics shape Nile life increasingly, and Mediterranean politics are brutal. The Ptolemaic dynasty operates through constant internal rivalry. Brothers marry sisters to preserve royal bloodlines. Assassinations, betrayals, and succession crises unfold repeatedly inside palace compounds, decorated with astonishing luxury. One evening, you attend a royal banquet where musicians play beside pools reflecting torchlight onto painted ceilings. Wine flows heavily. Courtiers smile too carefully. Every conversation feels strategic beneath the perfume and silk. A young official whispers quietly that surviving court life requires knowing when not to appear intelligent. You suspect he learned that painfully. Outside the palace district, ordinary Alexandrians navigate crowded markets and tense multicultural neighbourhoods where arguments occasionally erupt into riots between ethnic groups or political factions. The city's energy can turn dangerous quickly. Still, its beauty remains undeniable. At sunset, sea wind cools the marble streets while ships drift toward the harbour beneath skies streaked pink and gold. Scholars continue debating inside lamplit courtyards. Lovers walk beside the waterfront listening to waves strike stone piers rhythmically in the dark. You begin realising something important about Ptolemaic Egypt. It survives not by preserving purity, but through adaptation. Greek rulers become partially Egyptian. Egyptian traditions absorb Greek influences. Religions blend, art changes, language shifts. Identity itself becomes fluid around the edges. Some people hate this transformation. Others thrive inside it. Most simply live within it because history rarely asks permission before changing the world. Yet another force rises steadily beyond the Mediterranean now. Rome. At first, Romans appear mainly as diplomats, merchants, or military allies passing through Alexandria's complicated political world. But their influence expands relentlessly year after year. Trade agreements deepen into interventions. Political disputes invite Roman involvement. Egyptian rulers increasingly depend upon Roman support to secure fragile positions on the throne. Dependence quietly becomes vulnerability. One night, standing beside Alexandria's harbour beneath the lighthouse glow, You watch Roman ships anchored among Egyptian and Greek vessels rocking gently against dark water. The future has already arrived, and Egypt, for all its beauty and ancient memory, is drifting toward one final confrontation with a power even larger than itself. The Queen enters the room already performing. You understand this immediately. Not falsely, not shallowly. Cleopatra simply knows that power in her world depends upon controlling atmosphere before words even begin. She moves through palace chambers in Alexandria with calm precision, while servants adjust hanging linens against the sea breeze drifting through open windows. The air smells of salt, incense, warm oil lamps, and papyrus scrolls stacked across polished tables. Outside, the Mediterranean glitters beneath afternoon sunlight sharp enough to turn the harbour white with reflected fire. Inside, Egypt waits nervously between empires. Cleopatra the Seventh inherits a kingdom weakened by generations of debt, court rivalry, Roman interference, and internal instability. The Ptolemaic dynasty still presents itself in pharaonic splendour, but everyone understands the uncomfortable truth. Rome now shapes the Mediterranean world. And Rome is hungry. You first see Cleopatra reviewing diplomatic reports beside a shaded balcony overlooking Alexandria's royal harbour. She appears younger than the legends surrounding her later suggest. Intelligent eyes, controlled posture, quick attention shifting constantly between advisors speaking Greek, Egyptian, and Latin. She listens more than she talks at first. That feels important. Unlike many earlier Ptolemaic rulers, Cleopatra embraces Egyptian culture actively. She learns the Egyptian language, participates publicly in native religious traditions, appears before temple communities as a living embodiment of Isis herself. It is political strategy, certainly, but perhaps not only strategy. By now, Egypt's survival depends upon emotional legitimacy as much as military strength. You walk through Alexandria during these years and feel tension everywhere beneath the city's beauty. Grain ships crowd the harbour because Egypt still feeds enormous portions of the Mediterranean world. Merchants shout through packed markets scented with fish, wine, sweat, spice, and sea wind. Yet Roman officials appear increasingly often in administrative districts and palace corridors. Their presence changes conversations. People lower voices when discussing taxes, alliances, succession disputes. One bookseller mutters quietly that Rome smiles while measuring the walls for ownership. Again, nobody nearby argues. Cleopatra's early reign becomes tangled almost immediately in family conflict with her brother Ptolemy the Thetir'd. The Ptolemaic tradition of sibling marriage and shared rule creates endless instability, disguised as dynastic purity. Court factions gather around competing royal figures. Assassinations feel possible at any moment. Then Julius Caesar arrives in Alexandria. History remembers their relationship with endless fascination, but living through it feels far more dangerous than romantic. Caesar enters a city already near political collapse. Roman soldiers patrol tense streets while palace factions maneuver desperately behind closed doors. You hear rumours constantly. Cleopatra smuggled secretly into the palace. Caesar captivated immediately. Political negotiations turning intimate. Accounts differ in details, as they often do around famous people. What remains clear is the alliance reshapes both Egypt and Rome profoundly. You attend a royal banquet where Cleopatra and Caesar appear together, beneath ceilings painted deep blue with golden stars. Musicians perform softly while servants carry roasted quail, figs, dates, and imported wines through the crowded hall. The atmosphere feels electric, not joyful exactly, charged. Everyone understands enormous political forces gathering around the couple. Cleopatra seeks survival for Egypt and legitimacy for her position. Caesar seeks wealth, stability, and influence within Rome's brutal internal struggles. Desire and strategy intertwine until separating them becomes impossible. Outside the palace walls, Alexandrians react with fascination, suspicion, hope, resentment, and fear depending on who you ask. Some admire Cleopatra's intelligence and audacity. Others worry Egypt is slipping further beneath Roman domination disguised as alliance. One fisherman near the harbour shrugs while untangling wet nets at dawn. Queens love Rome until Rome stops loving queens. The sea wind carries away his laughter before you can answer. After Caesar's assassination in Rome, the Mediterranean world descends into fresh chaos. Cleopatra returns to Egypt balancing survival against enormous uncertainty. Then comes Mark Antony. Their partnership feels different from Caesar's, more emotional perhaps, certainly more theatrical. You watch Antony arrive in Alexandria surrounded by soldiers, banners, musicians, and the heavy scent of wine lingering around his entourage. He is charismatic, impulsive, visibly worn by years of war and political rivalry. Cleopatra understands him quickly. Together they build a dazzling court blending political ambition with extravagant performance. Festivals flood Alexandria with torchlight, perfume, music, and endless public spectacle. The queen appears dressed as Isis, Antony as Dionysus. Crowds cheer beneath flower-strewn processions winding through the city at night. But Rome watches everything, especially Octavian. Cold, patient, dangerously disciplined, propaganda spreads portraying Cleopatra as a seductive Eastern threat, corrupting Roman virtue itself. The reality, of course, is more complicated. Cleopatra is defending her kingdom using every diplomatic and personal tool available within a violent male power structure. Still, narratives matter, and Octavian controls Rome's narrative increasingly well. The final years feel haunted by inevitability. You stand beside the harbour while military ships prepare for conflict leading toward the Battle of Actium. Sailors move nervously through crowded docks. Armour smells of leather, oil, and seawater. Officers argue over strategy beneath tense skies. Everyone senses the stakes. If Antony and Cleopatra lose, Egypt likely loses independence forever. The defeat comes gradually, then all at once. Retreat. Confusion. Allies abandoning the cause. Roman power closing around Alexandria like tightening ropes. Inside the palace, the atmosphere turns unbearably heavy. Servants whisper. Messengers arrive breathless with worsening news. Antony drinks heavily some nights while Cleopatra continues calculating possibilities long after others surrender emotionally. Then comes the end. Antony dies first after military collapse and catastrophic misunderstanding. Cleopatra follows soon afterward. Accounts differ about the exact details. The famous story of the asp survives powerfully. Though historians still debate what truly happened, what remains undeniable is the emotional weight of the moment. The last pharaoh of Egypt chooses death rather than public humiliation beneath Roman triumph. You walk through Alexandria afterward, while Roman soldiers occupy key districts. The harbour still smells of salt and tar. Merchants still open shops at sunrise. Children still run through crowded alleys chasing stray dogs. Life continues, yet something immense has ended quietly beside the sea. Egypt no longer rules itself. The kingdom that once built pyramids, worshipped living gods, buried kings beneath mountains of stone, and endured thousands of years along the Nile now belongs to Rome, and the ancient world shifts irreversibly into something new. The temples do not fall all at once. That would almost feel kinder somehow. Instead, they fade slowly beneath changing centuries while the Nile continues flowing past columns blackened by incense smoke from rituals older than memory. Priests still sweep temple floors at dawn. Farmers still leave offerings beside local shrines. Sacred hymns still echo softly through stone halls during festivals lit by torchlight and moonrise. But the world surrounding Egypt has changed completely now. Rome rules from far away, and Rome grows tired too. You travel south from Alexandria along the Nile during the Roman period, passing villages where Greek, Egyptian, and Roman customs blend together so naturally that younger generations barely notice the mixture anymore. Soldiers stationed near the river speak Latin with Egyptian accents. Merchants wear Roman tunics beside amulets of ancient Egyptian gods. Identity becomes layered, blurred. Human beings adapt because a deception keeps families alive. At first, Roman rule feels practical more than dramatic. Egypt remains enormously valuable because of grain. Shipments sail northward, constantly feeding Rome's growing population. Tax systems expand with ruthless efficiency. Administrative records multiply beneath sweating scribes working long hours inside dusty government offices. One exhausted tax collector jokes bitterly that empires mostly survive through counting other people's harvests. Again, he's probably right. The countryside still holds astonishing beauty. Palm groves shimmer beside irrigation canals. White ibises drift through wetlands, glowing green after the flood season. Children splash along muddy riverbanks, while fishermen mend nets beneath broad-woven hats against the heat. The Nile remains Egypt's true heartbeat long after pharaohs disappear. Yet beneath ordinary continuity, ancient religious life slowly weakens. Not immediately. Traditional temples continue operating for centuries under Roman rule. Pilgrims still travel to sacred sites. Priests still preserve old rituals and hieroglyphic writing. At Philae, Dendera, Edfu, and other temple complexes, ceremonies honouring Isis, Horus, and Osiris continue beneath painted ceilings filled with stars. You stand inside one sanctuary at dusk while incense smoke drifts upward through fading beams of sunlight. The stone walls glow warm gold and deep blue. Elderly priests chant words carried through countless generations. The moment feels timeless and fragile, because outside the temple walls, new beliefs spread steadily across the empire. Christianity arrives quietly at first through travellers, merchants, and small urban communities. Then it grows, slowly, unevenly, deeply. You meet a young Christian scribe in Alexandria, copying religious texts beside an oil lamp late into the night. He speaks gently about one God rather than many, eternal salvation rather than temple offerings, humility rather than royal divinity. Not everyone welcomes these ideas. Religious tension sharpens gradually throughout Egypt. Some communities continue ancient practices peacefully beside newer faiths. Others clash bitterly. Temples lose patronage. Statues suffer damage. Priests complain that younger generations no longer memorize sacred traditions properly. An old temple caretaker at Edfu touches hieroglyphs carved into the walls with trembling fingers. They stopped listening, he says softly. You are not entirely sure whether he means the gods or the people. Meanwhile, the desert begins swallowing things. Abandoned shrines gather drifting sand against their entrances. Tombs collapse unnoticed beneath rockfalls. Entire settlements shrink as trade routes shift elsewhere. Once grand ceremonial roads crack beneath weeds and silence. Egypt itself becomes quieter historically. No more conquering pharaohs. No more pyramid building. No more royal processions claiming divine eternity beneath the sun. Yet ordinary lives continue stubbornly. You spend time in a small farming village near Luxor where families still plant grain according to the Nile floods, much as their ancestors did thousands of years earlier. Bread bakes in clay ovens, donkeys groan beneath water jars, mothers hum softly while braiding children's hair before sleep. History changes overhead while daily rhythms persist below. That continuity feels almost sacred. As centuries pass, hieroglyphic writing itself fades from living memory. Fewer priests understand the old symbols fully. Administrative systems shift toward Greek and later Coptic scripts. Ancient temple inscriptions become increasingly mysterious even to Egyptians themselves. Imagine that sadness. Walking beside walls your ancestors carved while no longer understanding the words. At Philae, among the last strongholds of traditional Egyptian religion, rituals continue remarkably late into history. Priests maintain ceremonies honouring Isis while Roman and later Byzantine authorities pressure older faiths steadily. Then eventually, even there, the temples close. The silence afterward feels enormous. You visit one abandoned sanctuary years later. Bats flutter through dark chambers once thick with incense and chanting. Sand gathers across cracked floors. The smell now is dust, bird droppings, old stone cooling after sunset, and yet traces remain everywhere. A faded painted eye watching from the shadows, a broken offering bowl beside a column, the faint outline of hands carved into stone by workers dead for thousands of years. Memory survives strangely. You realize something important wandering through these fading temples beneath desert stars. Ancient Egypt never truly disappears in one clean ending. It sinks gradually beneath layers. Greek, Roman, Christian, Islamic later still, modern, each age building over the previous one while fragments continue whispering underneath. The tombs vanish beneath sand not because history stops caring immediately, but because time simply keeps moving. Travellers pass ruins without knowing names. Farmers reuse ancient stones in village walls. Desert winds cover entrances patiently grain by grain. The old kingdom becomes stories, then legends, then almost dreams. One night beside the Nile, you stand listening to frogs pulse softly through the reeds, while moonlight reflects across dark water exactly as it did during Egypt's first villages. Somewhere beyond the river, hidden beneath cliffs and drifting sand, forgotten tombs still wait untouched in the darkness. The pharaohs once believed immortality depended upon monuments. Instead, it depends upon memory, and memory, like the river itself, never moves in entirely predictable ways. The desert keeps its secrets patiently. You feel that immediately standing beneath the cliffs of the Valley of the Kings in the cool silence before dawn. The air smells faintly of dust, stone, and dry wind drifting through narrow ravines carved by thousands of years of heat and erosion. Above you, the sky slowly lightens. Below your feet, entire worlds remain buried for centuries. Travellers crossed Egypt surrounded by ruins nobody fully understood anymore. Broken statues stared from the sand. Half-buried temples rose beside villages where children played among fallen columns older than memory itself. Ancient tombs disappeared beneath rock slides and drifting desert winds, while stories about curses and lost treasure spread from campfire to campfire. The old kingdom slept, but not forever. You move forward through the 19th century now, when explorers, scholars, grave robbers, diplomats, collectors, and dreamers arrive in growing numbers beside the Nile. Some come searching honestly for knowledge. Others arrive hunting wealth wrapped in the language of curiosity. Often the line between the two feels uncomfortably thin. At excavation camps near Luxor, workers dig beneath brutal sunlight while foremen study maps and fragments of inscriptions through sweat-stained notebooks. The heat presses heavily against everyone by midday. Dust coats skin, lungs, and clothing until entire crews seem sculpted from the desert itself. You hear picks striking stone constantly, then silence, then voices shouting excitedly through the cliffs. A sealed doorway changes everything. The modern fascination with ancient Egypt grows rapidly during these years. European museums compete aggressively for artifacts. Wealthy collectors fill private halls with statues, coffins, jewellery, and papyrus scrolls removed from tombs and temples across the Nile Valley. Sometimes preservation saves history. Sometimes obsession damages it terribly. You meet an Egyptian labourer named Hassan working beside an excavation team near Saqqara. His father farmed nearby fields. His grandfather told stories about hidden chambers beneath the sand long before foreign archaeologists arrived, with measuring tools and cameras. Hassan laughs quietly while brushing dust from a carved relief. The dead waited thousands of years, he says. Now everyone rushes them. The sentence feels wise, because archaeology itself becomes a strange mixture of reverence, ambition, scholarship, nationalism, and greed. Some excavators document carefully with genuine care for context and history. Others dynamite through sites chasing gold faster than understanding. Ancient Egypt survives another invasion, this time by curiosity. Then comes the discovery that captures the modern imagination more completely than perhaps any archaeological find in history. Tutankhamun. You stand in November 1922 beside Howard Carter's excavation near the Valley of the Kings. The morning air still carries traces of nighttime cold before the desert heat returns. Workers kneel carefully around stone steps emerging from beneath centuries of debris. Everyone senses possibility. No one fully understands it yet. Carter peers through a small opening into the tomb after candlelight flickers against hidden objects inside. His famous response survives because moments like this rarely happen in human history. Wonderful things. And truly, the chambers overflow with them. Gold gleams from the darkness untouched by grave robbers for over 3,000 years. Chariots, thrones, jewellery, statues, linen. Flowers dried into fragile shadows of themselves. The famous funerary mask waiting silently above the face of a forgotten boy king whose brief life suddenly becomes globally immortal. The air inside smells ancient, dry, still, like time itself sealed away. Yet even here, amid extraordinary beauty, the emotional impact feels quieter than modern headlines later suggest. The objects reveal not simply wealth, but humanity preserved accidentally through burial rituals and desert climate. A child's walking sticks, sandals worn thin at the heel, half-faded garlands placed lovingly beside a coffin by grieving hands thousands of years earlier. History becomes intimate again. News of the discovery spreads worldwide. Egypt captures modern imagination with enormous force. Films, books, museum exhibitions, and endless speculation transform pharaohs into cultural legends. Stories of curses spread after several deaths connected loosely to the excavation. The reality proves less supernatural and more human. Still, the myths persist because people want ancient Egypt to remain mysterious. And perhaps it should. You travel farther south where temples rescued from rising floodwaters during the 20th century stand carefully relocated stone by stone. Massive international preservation efforts save monuments like Abu Simbel from disappearing beneath reservoirs created by modern dams. Workers cut entire temples into enormous sections to move them. Imagine the strangeness of that. Ancient kings once carved mountains to achieve immortality. Modern engineers dismantle mountains to preserve their memory. Along the Nile today, old and new Egypt exist beside one another constantly. Cars pass donkey carts. Mobile phones ring beside temple ruins. Farmers still work fertile riverbanks beneath monuments built before many languages even existed. Tourists whisper through tomb corridors while local children sell postcards outside under the same burning sun that watched pyramid builders haul stone long ago. Time layers rather than replaces. One evening, Pharaohs. You stand alone near Giza after most visitors leave. The pyramids darken gradually beneath violet twilight, while city lights flicker in the far distance beyond the plateau. Wind moves softly across the sand, carrying the smell of dust and distant traffic together. The monuments feel quieter now than they do in photographs. Less triumphant, more thoughtful. You realize ancient Egypt survives not because its kings conquered death, but because human beings continue searching themselves inside these ruins. The pharaohs become mirrors reflecting timeless fears and desires. Power, loss, love, mortality, memory, the wish to matter after disappearing. And perhaps that is why the Nile still pulls people back after thousands of years. Beneath the gold masks and towering statues, ancient Egypt remains deeply human, a civilization built by tired workers, grieving families, ambitious rulers, frightened soldiers, patient farmers, hopeful children, and countless ordinary lives mostly forgotten by name. The river carried all of them eventually into history, just as it carries the stars tonight, and somewhere beneath the cooling desert sand, hidden chambers still wait in darkness, listening quietly while the world above continues changing without end. for tonight. Though, the journey settles gently beside the Nile. You have walked through reed villages and royal courts, across battlefields thick with dust, through incense-filled temples glowing beneath torchlight, and into tombs where silence lasted longer than entire civilizations elsewhere. You have watched kings rise believing themselves eternal, only to fade into memory beside the same patient river that nourished their dreams. And perhaps that is the strange comfort hidden inside ancient history. No empire keeps its power forever. No monument truly stops time. Yet human beings continue loving, building, grieving, laughing, and hoping across every age regardless. The workers hauling limestone beneath the desert sun were not so different from us. Neither were the mothers protecting children during famine, the soldiers fearing battle, or the old priests watching familiar worlds disappear. History survives because emotion survives. If this journey stayed with you tonight, I would genuinely love to hear where you listened from, what moments lingered most in your mind, or which corners of history you hope we wander through together next time. Until then, may your evening feel peaceful, your rest come easily, and your thoughts drift gently beneath kinder stars than those that watch the old pharaohs sleeping beneath the sand. Blessings to you and your family.